I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Mendocino County Board of Retirement meeting for April 16th. This is not April 16th.
Oh, my apologies.
For May is called to order at 8:30. And Judy, can you please take the roll call?
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Ms. Cavanis?
Here.
Mr. Haschak?
Here.
Mr. Cromer?
Here.
Mr. Shoemaker? Ms. Harris is absent today. Mr. Swope is also absent. Ms. Cubison?
Here.
Mr. Land?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Members of the public are welcome to address the board on subjects both on and off the agenda. Public comment on individual agenda items will be allowed at the time an agenda item is discussed and is limited to 3 minutes per person. Individuals wishing to address the board under public comment are welcome to do so per the instructions above. Is there any member of the public who would like to make public expression?
There is no public comment at this time.
Okay, that moves us on to item number 1, the consent agenda. All matters on the consent agenda are to be approved by one action without discussion unless a board member requests separate action on a specific item. Does any trustee wish to pull an item from consent for discussion? No, seeing none. Is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Okay, the consent agenda is approved by unanimous consent. And that brings us to item number 2, historical benefit review project status report and project update. Doris Rentschler, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Land. Trustees, in your packet is the monthly report for the Historical Benefit Correction Project. I did want to just briefly point out that we're in the very last throes of completing the project. As of the time of this report, there were roughly 8 accounts that still needed recalculation, but we're at the very last of this, and we do expect to have the project completed with the final corrections being posted in May.
Is there any board comment on this item? Seeing none. Are there any public comments?
There is no public comment.
Okay, so that leads us to item number 3. And I'll make a statement here. Item 3, the appeal by Diane Welsh has been withdrawn. And I'll make another statement. We are going to take some items out of order. We're going to go through item 5 through 9 until we reach 9:30, in which time we'll begin with item 4. Oh, there's Lenore. So that will take us to item 5. And that is the fiscal year 24-25 third quarter budget update. Robert Revelis, Retirement Financial Investment Officer.
Trustees, you have the preliminary quarterly budget update for the third quarter, fiscal year 25, accompanying memo and reports. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any public comment?
There is none.
Okay, we will accept that and move on to item 6, fiscal year 25-26 budget proposal. Robert Revelis, Retirement Financial Investment Officer.
Doris, do you have any comments or any? Okay, trustees, you've got the proposed fiscal year 26 budget before you. It's got an accompanying narrative and reports for your review. Just as a reminder, we did send that report out a few weeks ago to solicit some input on any potential questions, concerns that you might have. We incorporated any and all feedback into the budget proposal. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions related to, any of the portions of the proposed budget.
And I might just go ahead and point out here that the personnel section does include allocation for the new accountant position that we have discussed with the board previously. And that's why, as the narrative discusses, you see an increase in the expected personnel costs.
About a quarter of that, about a half of that total increase in personnel is just related to that one position.
What page is that?
On the narrative, it's on page 1.
Okay. Oh, okay,
Yep.
the narrative. Okay.
If you're looking at like Schedule 1, that would be page 5.
I do notice that the number of trustees attending the spring conference is set at 6. That's quite optimistic.
It's really, it is a potential placeholder. They're not specific to that particular event. It could be that more trustees are interested in the fall event. You could go to the fall event in that case. So these are just sort of placeholders that we want to keep.
And do we have people going to the Principles of Pension Governance next year?
I wouldn't necessarily know that at this time. Doris may have some insight.
I don't believe we have anybody who's expressed interest in going at this time. Depending on when it is next year, we could see a new trustee on the board. So, of course, we're open to registering anybody once registration opens.
We don't have, they don't have a date on when that's going to be. It was in August.
Well, it's actually, so all of calendar year 2025 programs have been canceled in terms of that particular event. They're refiguring the educational session and they're reopening it in 2026. As far as all we know is it's supposed to be in Tiburon, but the date is unknown at this time.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh. There was, any other comments or questions?
Mine was primarily about the investment manager fees, which I think we all expected an increase in some of those, but then a wash with the lack of those fees that we were paying on the international structure that we have adopted. So I was surprised by a little bit of the increases because some of them were 10, 9, and 8%, but I guess that's to be expected.
That is the current expectation. So, I've sort of been shocked at the last few years what we've seen with some of those growth rates. But, they sort of just are what they are. Some of them have been, much larger than we thought they would be. And that's not exactly the worst problem to have. Our investment returns have been good for the last few years. The total fees for the structure change, there is, I want to say it was about a $400,000 or $500,000 in total decrease with the new structure overall. So that's a good thing. One question in the memo that we would like to bring up to the board is the notion of having budget amendments related to investment manager fees, right? The manager fees are predominantly related to the net asset values of the growth of the strategies. And so largely those items are out of our control. Once we decide to make an investment, we're sort of locking ourselves into what those fees are. And so one of the questions that staff would like to get from the board is, would it be okay if we no longer bring budget amendments to the board if fees are related to investment management fees? If those fees end up being more than the budget, which you can see in some of the historical schedules from 21, 22, 23, you can see that trend in Schedule 4 and 5 where the investment manager fees for the budget are lower than what we actually ended up paying. And we would have to be bringing that back for amendments. And so we're requesting, would you delegate the authority to staff in that specific line item only, that we wouldn't have to actually be bringing budget amendments to the board for approval?
What has been the total swing in the approved versus
Couple $100,000 a year.
100% basis?
Let me look back here to Schedule 4. So I'm looking to page 12 of the report. This is a budget of 22, second column 900,000. And then if we go to page 14, there's a $200,000
So
increase there.
20%?
20,
So up to 20%.
25%.
And did we do incremental budget
Amendments in that year.
for the?
We didn't. We waited until late in the third quarter to present an amendment that we essentially felt would at least give us a little bit of cushion. So we would present a slightly overstated
So you just
amendment.
wanted to ride?
Yeah.
You're asking to let it ride for the full budget?
Yeah. Although I do also want to say to the board, these rates, we think these rates will be close. But, I could have told you that 2 or 3 years ago too. And it just hasn't been the case.
But if they go up, it means they're doing good performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The fees are based on assets under management, so if we have more asset growth than what we projected, our fees are higher than what was estimated.
So here's a real detailed question on that for you. So there are incentives in here, in some places above 7% performance. What is that chunk that's the actual incentive chunk?
The dollars?
Yeah, like how many people got paid above that 7% last year? But this year, nobody, right?
Well, this year, one manager, J.P. Morgan, and I think that's the one that I'm consistently calling out, so I assume that's the
Yeah.
one we're talking about. J.P. Morgan, in the last 2.5, 3 years, today that incentive fee is somewhere around $310,000.
And as a percentage of their regular fee.
That's their regular fee is 82 basis points, $250,000 a year, and the incentive fee is a little bit more than that. So a little bit more than a little bit more than that, maybe 100 basis points ish, somewhere in there.
That's quite an incentive fee.
Well, I mean, it's a nice fee for them, right? The strategy is extremely strong, and you can look at some of those return numbers in both Callan's report and in my infrastructure update as well. Now, granted, some of those numbers are quarterly annualized numbers, right? So there's a little bit of a downward bias, right, when we're talking about how what the standard deviation of those funds are, right? Which is measured at like 1 or 2%, which is extremely low, right? The fund is returning 10% plus or minus 1.5%, right? I mean, J.P. Morgan strategy has had 2 quarters in its entire history of a negative return. It's an extremely strong
So
strategy.
to the question, I don't see a problem with letting that ride without an amendment in the budget year.
We would still bring forward the same quarterly information. So none of the reporting would change. It would just be, we wouldn't necessarily have to ask you all for a budget amendment and approval.
But the actual expenses would still show on the quarterly reports as they do now.
Yeah, and it would show a percentage over.
And I would
under.
continue the same updates. We would see the same sort of reporting on the investment side and the accounting side.
If I could just get clarification. So we have this contract with J.P. Morgan that gives them 72 basis points or whatever, 82. And then if the returns are over 7%, then they get
A bonus, essentially.
Like,
It's an incentive fee structure.
100 points extra.
Well, it's based on the excess return over 7%. So we get the 7%. And then from 7% to, let's say today, we're getting about 10.9, 10.5, maybe almost 11. So from that return from 7% to, let's say, 11%, they get 15% of that return. And that's the $300,000.
And that's a quarterly adjustment?
That's an annual
Oh, it's an
adjustment.
annual,
Yeah.
so it's
It is
12
accrued.
months.
It is accrued every quarter, so this number is going to float around
Does it go down?
a lot. It will only go down when their performance goes down below 7%.
But is there a negative addition?
No,
So like if one quarter they make 10 and the next quarter they make 5, they
no,
still get the 2.5 for the year.
no, and I'll tell you why. Because the strategy is so strong, it's only had 2 negative
Okay.
quarters in its entire history.
That could happen.
Theoretically, it could happen. Yeah. But, I think that's extremely unlikely given the nature of the strategy, because they're in control of every single company in the fund. They control the entire company.
So but the incentive, is it point to point?
It's a
Year to year?
it's a 3-year rolling period. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the reason so there's a 3-year look back constantly ticking forward, and that number is going up and down. So when that total performance drops below 7%, which has never happened in the history of the strategy, then we would stop accruing those fees. Yeah.
Nice.
It sounds like a win-win to me, though. I mean,
So the question though is, do we want to require an amendment during the budget year or not? to show
That's really the question that we're asking.
Right, so we'd like direction on that, and then we also would need a motion for the board to adopt this budget for next fiscal year.
I move that the request for no amendment to the management fees be needed, except for an annual basis.
A second. Do we have any discussion on the proposal to not require a amendment for additional
For
management
fees, okay.
management fees?
So is this direction to staff or?
Yeah,
I
is
believe-
it
I believe it
direction,
was-
or are you gonna
Roll
vote
call
on it?
It sounded like there was a motion, and I thought there was a request for a motion.
Yeah.
Do
The
we need-
motion
do we
will
need
be
a
to
motion?
adopt the budget for
Okay,
next
then-
fiscal year. The other one could have been direction, but you
Uh,
can
we-
certainly
we
make
can-
it a
Well,
motion.
we can move it back to direction to staff, but I would care that at least a majority of the board is at least nodding their head before we do
Yeah.
that. I mean, once again, it seems like a win-win in this case.
John,
If
I-
we're
I
making
know
great
where
money,
you're
they
going
get
now,
they get a
'cause I
slice of it.
Well, and it saves us just having to come back to do an adjustment for something that we can't,
Yeah.
Now, we were using
Always-
JP Morgan
As
an example.
As an example. The other ones might not be so, are they the ones who are primarily causing these amendments?
I think that
JP Morgan.
JP Morgan? Okay.
yeah.
All right. So I guess the direction to staff is affirmed. You do not need to come back with an amendment during a budget year.
Related to manager
Related
fees.
to managers' fees.
Thank you.
Okay, so that means the motion's off the floor.
Yeah, because we didn't need one,
I
I guess.
withdraw the motion.
We will, though, for adoption.
Now we would be, I would be asking, go ahead.
Before the adoption, I do also want to point out that we finally paid off the initial PG Gold.
Yeah, the purchase of the
yeah.
pension administration system
it's-
was a 10-year contract.
It's been a decade. That's, I think at the time, Trustee Shoemaker, you might remember it. Trustee Cabinets may remember, there was some reluctance to do that. It was a big expense. We've been carrying it for the last 10 years. And so there's that large decrease in this budget related to those that implementation fee, which was about $79,000 a year.
And it was nice of LRS, the vendor that sells the Pension Gold software, to agree to a 10-year payment schedule to make, the board more comfortable with that kind of sizable outlay. It was the first pension system and probably the largest purchase that the MCERA had ever undertaken. And they were certainly willing to work with MCERA in the past to set up a way for us to purchase that was acceptable to the board that was here 10 years ago. And so yes, it's paid off, and we've made some updates and changes to it over the past 10 years, and it is really becoming a more accurate and useful system, far outstretches what we had as a manual system before.
So the currently the 139,000 that's in the budget is strictly the maintenance fees going forward, and not the purchase fee, the hosting maintenance and that sort of thing.
Correct. Our license and the hosting
Okay.
is the way I
Yeah,
would describe
and there's
it.
also some hourly in there,
Okay.
fees as
Sure,
well.
sure. Some consulting hourly.
Right.
Yeah,
Is that
it's-
escalates every year, I would assume.
The hourly rate, I don't think they've changed their hourly rate since I've been here, which is 5 years. So we're paying the same hourly cost if we do, let's say, an enhancement, and so it's not just fixing a bug in the system, but actually a change that we're requesting, and that hourly rate for services hasn't changed, I think, during my tenure at $150 an hour. It's not unreasonable.
That's better than most now.
Alex, I had a question.
Okay.
On page 3 of the investments, third paragraph, and it says fees for Brandis are 75 basis points, fees for 91 are 73, fees for T. Rowe Price are 104, and fees for SSGA are 2.5 basis points. Why is that so much lower than the others?
That is the new passive index, the World ex-US index.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's, no active management, just a simple passive index. Yeah.
Chair
Which-
Land, I'll propose a motion if you'll entertain.
Yes.
I move that we approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 as proposed.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on the proposal or on the motion? Do we have any public comment? Or unless Shamice, you're pulling that? Okay.
I'm not.
There's
Is there
no,
any public comment?
no public comment.
Okay. Roll call vote, please, Judy.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Cavanis?
Aye.
Mr. Haschak?
Aye.
Mr. Cromer?
Aye.
Mr. Shoemaker?
Aye.
Ms. Cubison? Aye. And Mr. Land?
Aye.
Approved.
All right. That will bring us to item 7, retirement accountant classification discussion. Doris Rentschler, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Land. As I mentioned, the adopted budget for 25-26 does include funding for an accountant position for MCERA. The item in front of the board today is a discussion whether MCERA would like to request the county make a retirement-specific accountant classification. There are several reasons that we might want to consider that. As this board recalls, we did spend some time working with the county at the board's request to establish a set of comparator agencies to evaluate market studies for retirement staff, because there were no comparable positions in the comparator agencies that the county used for the rest of the county-wide studies. And we were able to obtain an agreement with the county and identified 5 systems to use as comparators for MCERA retirement staff. This position, if is not made retirement specific would be subject to market studies based on the comparator agencies the county uses for all of their other accountant positions. And we are asking that direction from the board to approach the county to make it a retirement specific classification, because the types of duties done for MSERA are different enough from accounting duties at other county departments that we feel it is unique enough to warrant its own position classification in the county tables. If you have any questions regarding the information in the board item, I'm happy to entertain those. We have attached to this item a draft of what a retirement accountant classification duties would be, so you could see the distinction in that job description versus the county's accountant auditor 2 position.
Are there retirement accountants in the other 5 comparator counties?
There are retirement accountants, I believe, in 4 of the 5. I would have to confirm that, but many of those other systems do have a retirement-specific accounting classification.
And does that classification description suit what you are wanting this position to be?
This was based on specifically work that we plan to have the new position work on that has been previously assigned to Robert. So in some regards, it overlaps with the description of retirement accountant at other positions, but in some regards it may differ. I don't have the specifics to go into as far as that. I'm happy to, of course, bring back more information if you'd like.
I just want to point out that sometimes even a comparable classification in another county does not necessarily result in the same class study if the actual duties are different enough. So that's why my question is if those duties are similar enough that we think they would still be included in that analysis, or if it would still be an outlier.
I believe that the work would be comparable enough to make it a valid market comparator.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think even if the title is different to what Trustee Cubison is asking, there are still other positions that would cover some of those activities, like the reporting and the financial statement review. Maybe it's a fiscal manager by title somewhere else. Or an analyst, or they may even have some duties of an accounting sort of specialist. A lower entry level type accounting position, not a journey level position.
Yes, my question would be, has there been any study about what the cost would be if we use those comparator counties?
No, I hadn't broached those discussions with the county, and I specifically did not look. I can say in the market study that was done with the rest of our retirement staff, we found that our retirement staff was at market and they actually didn't see any adjustment in the last study with the use of the 5 retirement-specific comparator agencies. Robert's position did see a market adjustment, but his position is of a much higher level in the organization than the staff members that were considered in the last market study that was done. I do not know specifically how a retirement accountant would have compared.
So this item is simply to request a separate classification, and it's not necessarily asking for that the position be filled at this time.
Correct. We wouldn't be looking to fill until sometime into the new budget year, but this is just direction on whether or not the board would like me to broach discussions with the county about creation of a retirement-specific accounting classification.
Okay. Do we have any other board discussion at this time? Questions, comments? Alex? Oh, yeah.
So I just wanted to take this opportunity to remind the board of the pending case before the California Supreme Court, the Lucera decision. And you may recall that the board authorized us to join an amicus brief that was filed by Alameda, and 12 other retirement systems joined in. And there are many, many amicus briefs in this case. Many, the county, CSAC, and the cities are on the other side, and a lot of folks are joining the retirement systems. And if the California Supreme Court upholds what the Court of Appeal decided, then the decisions about classifications and salaries will only be with this board, and whatever decisions you make then become ministerial to the Board of Supervisors. And in the 20 or whatever years I've been working on these cases, this is one of the biggest decisions that I've seen come along. So I just wanted to remind you of that.
I'll speak personally that I think this follows a path that we've been following recent years to define the roles and functions of our staff and have the job specifications match what their duties and responsibilities are. And hopefully this would be furtherance of compare apples to apples when we're doing these studies, not comparing to other comparators that do not have those positions. So I am supportive of giving direction to the executive director and staff to pursue this.
I forgot to mention one thing, and that is that in recent times, this board and the county have worked very collaboratively. So I certainly didn't want to suggest there have been any wrinkles, although that hasn't always been true with regard to our executive director's contract a few years ago. And initially, I'll remind those of you who weren't here at the time, we didn't always have an accountant. And when we initially went to the Board of Supervisors to ask to have an accountant for our many $million-dollar pension fund, we were initially told no. And then fortunately things worked out. But in recent times it's been quite collaborative, so I did want to mention that.
Is there any further comment, discussion? Do we have a general consensus to recommend the recommended action, or to accept the recommended action, which is to establish a retirement-specific account classification and request that HR use our new classification language?
And I believe I saw a consensus, but if you can just make sure that Alex sees it.
Yeah, it looks like we have
Okay.
a general consensus for
Great.
that. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
That will conclude item 7. Thank you. And bring us to item 8, if we have time, and we do. Service Provider Evaluation Report. Doris Rentschler, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Land. Trustees, this is an informational item. No action is required. Last year, I believe, the board adopted a service provider evaluation policy, and part of that policy delegated authority for completing those evaluations to the executive director. As such, this is the first report back to the board on the evaluations we've completed. So far, we have evaluated 3 vendors. We have a medical service provider, MMRO, who assists us with processing our disability applications, because some staff work directly with them as far as completion of our disability applications. Those staff were involved in the evaluation. We learned several things from that, including a couple of areas of concern and some items that we will include in next contract amendments, including some specific performance expectations as far as turnaround to get us the reports once an evaluation has been completed and things of that nature, and putting in some hard measurable metrics on those service expectations. We also did a review of our audit and risk management consultant. Larry Jensen met with pretty much every trustee and staff with the completion of our entity-wide risk assessment. Larry also assisted us with the RFP process for obtaining a firm to complete the agreed-upon procedure audits and the evaluation of his services was included. We had no concerns regarding the services of audit and risk management services firm. And the last evaluation completed in this report was with Levi Ray Shoup. That is our pension gold vendor, our pension system administration system. And again, we had staff who was involved with using the pension gold software and interacting with LRS, create the evaluations for that service provider. And we have, again, found their services to be acceptable. They were well within the ranges of acceptable performance. We did have a couple of things that we may add to future contracts regarding like our data privacy agreement and maybe some response times in future amendments. If you have any questions regarding that, I would be happy to address any questions.
Trustee Shoemaker.
The amendment for the MMRO contract, do you expect that in the near future?
I believe we're doing annual contract extensions with that. So we'll, which I think might review around July 1. So that would be items that we'll include in those discussions as we seek to extend the service contract.
So basically, they were on a learning curve, and now they've learned.
Well, yeah, they did learn a lot about the CERL specific requirements for disability, which are different than workers' comp, and they're different than, you know, anywhere else in the country. And they have worked collaboratively with staff and council to ensure that the questions that we need answer to comply with the requirements of the county retirement law have been met, and they put forth some good effort there, and we certainly appreciate their work in that regard. Just recently, there had been some concern about some timeliness of some items.
Yeah, that's with the MMRO, right? It seems like there's lots of issues with the timeliness that you're citing, and you know, response time, and contact people, and all of that. So, is in this amendment, are we going to deal with those issues?
That would be my intention, is we put in specific requirements if we contact them, maybe having a backup person. So if our original contact is out on vacation or medical leave or anything else, that someone else is truly checking that person's inbox and can respond back to us in a timely manner, because sometimes that has been the issue. The person has been out of the office and it kind of sat there until that person came back. So yes, we will be addressing those specific types of actions in the service requirements in future contracts.
Okay, and if they're not responsive to that, then are there other options?
Yes, and we can RFP for services. There are several other firms that provide similar types of services. Since we already have a longstanding relationship with MMRO and they've sort of learned our process, we're not looking necessarily at changing that at this point in time, but certainly if we had significant concerns going forward regarding their ability to provide the necessary services in a timely manner, we could certainly look at RFPing for medical services.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to add anything, or did I cover it? All right, we're good.
Okay. Do we have any other discussion on any of the other two vendors who were evaluated? Okay.
Actually, if I could just ask the board, are there any particular vendors or service providers that you would like evaluated next? We have what we call key service providers that are the purview of the board to contract with, like our actuary and our auditors and things of that nature, and our investment consultant. And then we have, you know, the more routine work, like the consultant for our communications that we had years ago, or the medical services provider. So if you want specific service providers evaluated, you can certainly send those to me via email, and I'm happy to include those in the next round of evaluations that are done. I'm sorry for that.
Is there a master list somewhere?
There is a list in the board charter that says what are key service providers that are the responsibility of the board. They mention it by like actuary, not necessarily the name Siegel, but if
Yes.
whatever information you have as far as preference of the board, I'll incorporate that in the next round.
Chair,
Yes.
my only direction on that would be, if they're a key service provider and we have a contract coming due, I would like to see an evaluation of that person before a contract renewal is brought to the board, so that should probably take priority over the others.
And to that end, during my tenure here, we had extended contracts with the actuary and our financial auditor because we didn't want to make changes in those service providers while we were in the middle of the correction project. And with the completion of that, both of those contracts will be coming to a close with the evaluations for the period ending June 30 of this year, which would be the report that we'll get from our auditor and from our actuary by the end of the calendar year. So I'll look at doing an evaluation of those service providers in the first quarter probably of the new fiscal year. So the board has that information and then can direct us whether to open an RFP. Again, we've been with those service providers for quite a while and had just chosen to sort of extend that contract the last couple of times. So we would be looking for direction from the board on whether to issue an RFP or an RFI in any regard. But we'll certainly bring back an evaluation of services. And because those are some service providers that directly interact with the board as far as the actuary and with the committee as far as the audit firm, those folks who have had direct exposure to those service vendors, those trustees will be included in requesting an evaluation be completed.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this? I'm assuming that nobody has further discussion on it?
No
No
public comment.
public comment? Okay. That brings us to item number 9, administrative report, if we believe we can get through that in 15, and I'm betting we can.
We can. Thank you, Trustee Land. In the administrative report, there is an item for board direction regarding the offsite. A couple of months ago, I inquired whether or not the board wished to have an offsite meeting. It'd be like a full day, primarily addressing educational aspects and maybe an update of the strategic plan. After discussion with the chair, we were thinking that it might make sense to have the offsite held in early next calendar year. That would provide an opportunity for the new trustee elected to the safety seat to participate and have an opportunity to meet and engage with the board. So we're looking for maybe some direction on whether you would like it as a special meeting in addition to the regular February meeting, or simply replace the February meeting and not do routine business, or combine it and do our routine business and the educational sessions at the same meeting. Also, if there's any preferences on location, we were considering using the County Behavioral Health Training Center in Redwood Valley as an option, unless somebody has preferences for alternate location.
Does anybody have any objection to this being in February? I believe that's the time we had kind of zeroed in on. I personally like that option number 2, and that was to forego normal business and have it be just the offsite. I don't know what would happen, or if we could change that if something came up that we needed to address.
If there was something time critical, certainly we could add it to the agenda, as late as Friday before the meeting, if the meeting was on a Wednesday, to incorporate it if there was a critical need. I believe there's also another emergency provision that allows the board to address something if it was so time sensitive it could not wait.
Yeah, and I think we would have plenty of advance notice. We'd have our December, our January meeting, and so I like that option. Does anybody disagree with that? Option 2?
I think you're talking about option 3.
Well,
No,
I-
option
it-
3 was to do both. I
Well,
believe.
I'm sorry, I verbally mentioned them
okay.
in the, not the order in the memo.
Oh,
In the
okay.
memo, what you
Oh, okay.
asked, what you're suggesting is actually
It
option
is
3.
option
And
3
that was
right there, yes.
my
Option-
apologies for not reading it off the page, but talking from memory.
So, yeah, I prefer option 3, but I obviously could see other perspectives on that.
So
Uh,
if we're looking at something like that, I would go ahead and keep the same date, the third Wednesday, but rather than doing a routine meeting here, it would be a special meeting off-site, and it would be almost a full day of activity, educational sessions, and the system will bring in lunch.
Okay,
Just one thing is that the Behavioral Health Training Center doesn't have any windows. So it's a long day.
Well, we can take some breaks and go outside. We actually were looking to see if they had maybe any outdoor seating that might allow us to take lunch outside, and we didn't actually see any seating area necessarily. They do have an adequate parking lot, though.
I was more worried about it being cold.
February, last time we did an offsite, it was a little chilly, and some folks didn't really want to sit outside, although some did. It was cool that day. But you're right, there are no windows there.
okay, I think those are our concerns, but I think the consensus, or at least my opinion, doesn't seem to be overridden by anybody else's opinion on this. Let's proceed with item 3.
I take it as a pro bono. And
No, it's $90 for the whole day.
That's
Yeah, other venues are quite
Pricey.
pricey,
right,
but they do have windows.
And that is, the county, that's what they charge other county departments. If it was actually an outside organization, I believe the fee's $250 or higher.
Some
maybe-
of the alternate locations would be going back to Yokayo Ranch, or going down to Hopland to the UC Extension building, which is out in the woods. It's
well,
really
that's a
pretty.
good one.
Well, that'd be.
But it is a bit of a drive.
Lots of windows.
From the coast it's all the same. There's some less to drive.
I'm happy to look at those other locations. They would be a little more expensive. I don't remember exactly what we paid for the facility when we were at Yokayo. But if there's a preference for a location other than the Behavioral Health Training Center, I certainly can bring back some options there.
I think we should just agree on the date and the concept, and perhaps we can explore the locations.
Okay. So my understanding for the date is we would maintain the third Wednesday in February, but rather than doing a regular meeting, we would do an educational offsite. Is there consensus on that? Keeping the date as the third Wednesday? Okay. And what I also will do as the time approaches is bring back like an agenda or some suggestions for topic for board input. Did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, a question about public comment. Is this public notice of this special meeting, and can the public comment?
Yes. Now, we won't be broadcasting when we do an offsite because we don't have some of the technical support that we would need. But what we do have is it is an open public meeting. It is agendized and posted, and people can come to make comment if they wish.
outstanding.
Okay, so I'll bring back topics, agenda, and location discussions at a future meeting. Thank you.
I do have a question about I'm just curious if you know how many people attended your benefits, your future.
Yes, I saw that attendance was roughly 80 people, I want to say. They had over 100 registered, but I think attendance floated around the high 70s to the low 80s. I'm going to get a finalized list of who actually was there. I do think it went over pretty well, and I was pleased to partner with HR at their health and wellness, and now health, wellness, and retirement sessions. We have another one planned, I believe, in September.
I have comments on that, but I was going to save them for general board discussion.
Okay. However you want to handle it. Okay, so that pretty much takes us to either the general board discussion, or we could go back up and pick up item 4, starting with the Callan presentation, but I don't expect them for about another 5 minutes, so if you wanted to put in a break till 9:30, we could do that.
I want to put in a break till 9:30 and have the general board discussion and trail that at the very end.
Okay.
Like it's supposed to be.
So we will take a break and reconvene at 9:30.
Right.
Okay. Donuts.
Does it work? All right, I'm gonna put a hole in the table. Okay, it's past time.
I think we have the other half of that, don't we?
Yeah, we need the pedestal or whatever it is. Yeah, we'll just leave that right there in case. Okay, we're looping back now to item 4. Is Scott ready, first of all? Yeah, I think. Yeah, okay. Item 4, investment matters. And the first item is real asset structure review. Greg DeForest from Callan or Clarine Tellin.
Great. Well, thank you and good morning. Thanks as always for having us. We have 2 agenda items today. So the first we'll kick off with is the real assets structure review. So looking at the structure of the real assets portfolio and the managers that you employ within that portfolio. So your real estate managers and your infrastructure managers. The second item that we'll cover is our regular quarterly performance review. So talking a bit about the capital markets as of the end of March, and then the performance that we saw for the portfolio. Now, notably, it's felt like a pretty volatile year in the capital markets in the first 4 or 5 months here, as we've all seen in the headlines and felt, frankly. But I will note that when we look at performance for the total portfolio, your portfolio has weathered that volatility quite well. So absolute performance has actually eked out a gain for the first quarter and through April as well. So keep that in mind, but we'll get to performance as the second agenda item. Focusing now on the real assets portfolio, I do want to introduce my colleague Aaron Quach, who's on the line. Aaron is a member of our real assets research team. So he spends all of his time researching these asset categories, real estate and infrastructure, and meeting with managers in these categories, including your managers. So he's one of our in-house experts that we turn to with questions on your managers on a regular basis, as he's in the field doing due diligence on these managers all the time. So starting on page 1 of this presentation, we just wanted to level set what we're doing today, why we're doing it, and where this fits into the broader process of total portfolio review. So as you'll all recall, we did an asset liability study a couple years ago, confirmed the broad asset allocation, so the percentage asset allocation to each broad asset category, U.S. equity, non-U.S. equity, fixed income, and real assets, that's real estate and infrastructure. We then spent a fair amount of time looking at the U.S. equity structure specifically, whether we wanted to make any changes there, moved on to non-U.S. equity. The changes decided by this board for the non-U.S. equity portfolio are in process of implementation. That started in April, so you'll see that in the April performance report. And today we're talking about real assets. The last piece of this will be looking more specifically at your fixed income structure, so that'll come later in the year. Now, in total, you have a 17% allocation to real assets. That's your target, and that's split with an 11% target to real estate, core open-end real estate, and 6% to infrastructure. And you're pretty close to right on top of that target right now, thanks to Robert's good work. The role of those two pieces within the portfolio is highlighted in the bottom half of this page, and I think is just a good reminder of why we hold each of these categories within the total portfolio construct. So U.S. equity, that's really where we're looking for capital growth. So we expect higher returns, but also higher volatility from that piece of the portfolio. Same with non-U.S. equity, but non-U.S. equity also provides diversification to your U.S. equity portfolio. Fixed income, that's really our anchor to windward. So that's our equity risk mitigation, our low risk anchor within the portfolio. And then the role of the real estate and infrastructure is to provide diversification, particularly to your equity exposure. So it's a diversified return stream within the total portfolio construct. We also expect capital growth from this piece of the portfolio, which we've seen. So, as we look at the performance of your existing managers and your existing construct, I think it's done well, and it's really served those two purposes well. But But we do have an opportunity today to talk about what changes we might want to make to the portfolio, both from a total structure perspective, so the number of managers, the types of managers, as well as reconfirming our conviction in the existing managers. Are there any changes that we want to make to the existing managers that you employ in the portfolio? Flipping one page forward, we have a bit more detail of what you currently have in the portfolio. So currently we have 2 core open-end real estate managers, and that allocation is split between Barings and DWS Reef. Together, those 2 make up about 10% of the total portfolio. So like I said, right in line with your target of about 11%. And then infrastructure, which is a piece of the portfolio that we added in 2021. The decision was made in the 2019 to 2020 timeframe, and then by the time your capital was actually called, it was 2021. So that's been in place for about 4 years. That allocation is split between 2 managers, IFM and JP Morgan. Again, both open-end managers. In total, these 4 managers represent about $740 million in the total portfolio. Again, about 17.5% when we look at the pie chart. Performance for these managers is captured on page 5. This is through the first quarter. So we'll look at this again in more detail as part of the total portfolio performance review, but did want to put this up front. Just one page ahead, no problem. So we have a snapshot of what we've experienced from a return perspective for each of these managers. Now, when we look at your real estate managers, again, that's Barings and Reef. Barings has had more portfolio return challenges in recent years than Reef, and Aaron will talk more specifically about that portfolio and what's driven that. But 2023 was a particularly challenging year for them versus peers. That was really due to a handful of office properties that they had in the portfolio that they wrote down and got rid of out of the portfolio. So, that's a caveat, but something that we've looked at in the last couple years when reviewing their performance. The infrastructure managers, IFM and JP Morgan, have really done a nice job for you since addition to the portfolio. They've provided the diversification that we were looking for and turned in pretty notable positive returns over the period in the portfolio as well. Are there any questions on what we're looking at, kind of the goals for today before we start? Before I turn it to Aaron to talk about each of the individual managers more specifically, and then talk about kind of potential portfolio evolutions.
Not seeing any.
Okay.
Great. Thanks everyone for having me today. It's a pleasure to join you. As Claire mentioned, I'm going to start by going through just a quick snapshot of each of your 4 managers, and then we'll talk a little bit more about structure and vehicles and some other options that we could potentially consider as part of the portfolio, and then get into our recommendations. So starting with the Barings Core Property Fund, this is an Odyssey fund, which means it's an open-end diversified core equity fund. It invests across real estate property sectors and is part of the 25 funds in the NCREIF Odyssey Index. The fund has a net asset value of just under $2 billion, making it the 5th smallest out of the 25 funds in the Odyssey Index. The bar charts on the right show the property sector weights for the fund in blue, and for the Odyssey Index in green. So we'll use the Odyssey Index as a benchmark for performance and property type weighting, but also as the peer group because it represents 24 other similar funds. So looking at the sector allocations today, they look pretty favorable with an overweight to multifamily and industrial and a significant underweight to office. But if we rewind just 2 years ago to year-end 2022, that office allocation was 22%. And a meaningful portion of that office exposure was concentrated in 4 buildings in central business district locations in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York City, and Washington, D.C. So these 4 assets were pretty challenged due to the shift to hybrid and remote work, particularly in these markets, and also faced some capital markets challenges such as loan maturities. Barings wrote down these investments substantially in 2023 and 2024 as they looked to sell the assets, which was the primary driver of underperformance, as Claire mentioned on the prior slide. As of today, all 4 assets have been sold out of the portfolio, which is why the fund is only 6% office today. The remaining office exposure consists of just 2 buildings in Austin, and one of those buildings is expected to be sold later this year. From an organizational standpoint, it's worth noting that co-portfolio manager Deb Schwartz is departing the firm next month. The other portfolio manager, Chris Berry, will take over as the sole lead portfolio manager going forward. The other major org update here is that Barings recently acquired Artemis Real Estate Partners, which is another real estate.
Aaron, hold on.
Sorry.
We have a question. Lenore?
Who purchased those 4, you might say, distressed properties?
Yeah, so I don't have the specific buyers for each of these properties, but generally speaking, we haven't seen a ton of institutional interest, so they're not necessarily selling to other, similar Odyssey funds like, their peers in the institutional world. What we've seen is that a lot of the buyers for these types of properties tend to be more private wealth or high net worth buyers, and the reason is because they're looking at a sort of cost basis argument here rather than trying to solve for a certain IRR or return target. They're looking at the fact that a San Francisco office building this particular building, for example, may have used to cost $300 a foot and now it's $100 a foot, just for round numbers. And so that can be pretty attractive if you're planning to hold the asset for a long period of time. So these are not necessarily institutional peers, but more sort of individual or private buyers.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the other organizational update for Barings is that they recently acquired Artemis Real Estate Partners, which is another investment management firm. And as a result, there's going to be some integration with the Artemis team into the Barings platform. There have been some departures from Barings subsequent to that transaction. We believe those organizational changes, including some of those departures, to be material. So that's something that we're monitoring closely. A couple of examples of those departures include the head of real estate, John Ackerblum, who is going to be stepping away, and Deb Schwartz, as I mentioned. There's also a lead acquisitions person on the West Coast that's going to be stepping away as well. So we're going to be monitoring all those changes. I think, bringing in the Artemis team and sort of integrating them into the broader organization over the next 18 to 24 months will eventually be, additive to the platform, but it's definitely something that we need to monitor and, evaluate how that goes. One last note on Barings is the redemption queue for the core property fund is $595 million. That represents about 31% of the total net asset value of the fund, which is well above the Odyssey average of 13%. Barings expects to be able to resolve the queue by mid-2026, but of course those assumptions are dependent on the capital markets, their ability to sell assets, their ability to make redemption payments, and of course preventing future redemptions from existing investors.
Robert.
So Aaron, I know that about 5% of that other column of the Barings exposure is their building in Boston, the life science building. Can you talk about the difference between like a life science building and why wouldn't it be included as an office building?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that the industry in general has been trying to kind of grapple with how we're going to evaluate these alternative property sectors going forward and how to group those in a way that's consistent. And NCREIF has sort of done that by including life science office into traditional office, or into the broader office category, I should say. Some similar movements include medical office being included in office. That multifamily sector that you see us showing here is soon going to change to residential, and that's going to include things like student housing and manufactured housing and single family rental built for rent. So there have been some changes there that'll be reflected sort of in the coming quarters across the industry. But I would say that life science asset that you mentioned, life science has outperformed traditional office. It is different and didn't have the same sort of negative impact from COVID, because when you think about the work that's done in life science building, it's pretty resilient to hybrid and remote work. You sort of have to be in the building to be able to do sort of the R&D testing and things that they do in these properties. The challenge in life sciences is that because it had performed well and there was a strong demand for life science space, we saw a lot of new supply over the last few years. And so that's really been the challenge in places like Boston, Cambridge, San Francisco Bay Area. and San Diego, which are the three major markets for life science. And then there's sort of this next tier of other markets that are kind of more growthy. And so across those life science markets, we've seen just an influx of new supply, which has really put a lot of pressure on the life science market. So, I think there's a little bit more headwind to life science than there was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But over time, as we work through that new supply, we expect life sciences to continue to be a part of institutional real estate portfolios and eventually to kind of work itself out of this supply-demand dynamic.
Question. Could you simplify the fund redemption story at the bottom of this page?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way these open-ended funds work is that you commit for an undetermined period. You're in the fund, you stay invested, but at any point, on a quarterly basis, you can request redemption. And so the queues form when more investors request redemption than there is capacity to pay out all those investors. So right now, the way to interpret that 31% number is that 31% of all capital that's invested in the fund is in the line to get out of the fund. And that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those folks are going to actually redeem their entire portion. They can rescind their redemption request. So they can say, I put in this full redemption request. Actually, I only need half, or actually, I don't want to redeem and I want to stay in the fund. So there's a little bit of uncertainty as to whether that full 595 million actually wants to be 100% redeemed out of the fund. But the way to interpret that is essentially that 31% of the capital invested in the fund is in line to exit the fund.
And so, what is the timeline? It says here, so a year and a half or about a year to resolve it. When it's resolved, what does that mean to us, the shares we hold or the value we hold?
Yeah, so as an investor that is not in the redemption queue, if you're staying invested in the fund, the impact to you directly, there's not necessarily a direct impact to the performance. But if you think about the way the fund needs to manage its capital, because they need to pay 595 million at some point over, and their goal is to do that over the next year or 6 quarters. What that means is that when they sell assets, rather than being able to use that capital to perhaps buy new assets or take advantage of the acquisition market, if they see great opportunities to buy new assets, they may be a little bit more constrained and instead having to kind of make those larger redemption payments in order to satisfy investors that are exiting the queue. But of course, Barings has full discretion on how they manage that, their capital activities. They're not required to make redemption payments every quarter, and the amount that they pay is also up to their discretion. So there's also some flexibility for them in order to, use that capital to pay redemptions, to buy new assets, to pay down debt, to fund other activities of the fund. So they do have some flexibility there.
And that's not unique to Barings. So if you think about the core open-end universe of real estate managers, Aaron, are there any Odyssey managers that don't have an exit queue right now?
Yeah, there's only a handful of funds that don't have an exit queue at all. There's probably 4 or 5 funds that don't have a queue, and those are all kind of either very well positioned funds or sort of in a unique position. The reason we quote that Odyssey average of 13% is just to kind of provide some context for the typical Odyssey fund or the average across the entire index. So Barings Q is on the higher end of that spectrum, but certainly not unique in just having a redemption queue relative to their peers.
Well, does that change the ratio of the revenues that they're going to end up with to their costs, which affect our payout or our part of this program? You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, so let me jump in here and just say, that as they sort of manage that, let's say 300 million, they want to pay that out slowly, right? They don't want to sell a bunch of assets to shrink the size of the fund just to make a complete payout, right? But they're gonna do a few things while they go through this process. They're gonna look to sell specific types of buildings, right? Probably the older ones, the ones that need more capex. the ones that have lower leasing, right, coverage. They're going to look to move out of those. They're going to look for distributing to sponsors,
I
right?
understand how you liquidate. How do you cover costs when you're liquidating and not
You don't
investing
pay-
in increasing value?
Because you
and
don't pay it all
increasing
out.
income?
You don't pay it all out. And so we've seen a slight decrease over time. If you look back at some of the first real estate updates that we provided last year, you'll see that yield has come down.
Okay.
You know, so that's part of the process of this churn that's happening, is that yield is coming
And so their
down.
yield will continue to be low to whatever.
Potentially, you know, it's
for
at
longer than
3.3.
it takes to clean
Yeah.
the queue. Because once they clean the queue, the value of everything in their portfolio is less.
Well, my
fund
question
will
to
be
Aaron
smaller.
would be,
Yeah.
you know, is
Okay,
how
that-
often are there queues, right? That's sort of the other question. Because if you're thinking about this saying, well, we expect the entire queue to be paid down, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's completely realistic. That would be a question
Well,
to
take this
Aaron.
down to 10% or 13%,
Yeah.
which is difficult.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah.
I get yes.
So
The
the
other-
income would be down.
The other implication for you all is if you decided to make a change and redeem assets from Barings, either in part or in whole, you can't get your money back immediately as long as there is this queue. So there is a process, a timeline from that perspective. You get in the queue, you be part of the queue, and you take redemption payments.
Is our money stale during this period? I mean, does it not increase, or what we see on the reports will not increase typically?
You will continue to generate returns off the portfolio. I don't know if I'm answering the right question. Yeah, you will continue to, and the exit queues, Aaron can give more color on this, but part of the design is to protect existing investors. So there is good reason for them.
Okay.
Trustees
Yes.
Swope?
Yes, could you elaborate just a little on the category for the life sciences? Is it primarily R&D facilities, or is it more pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities? Could you elaborate, please?
Yes, so life sciences generally can include various types of facilities, including manufacturing. If it is a life science manufacturing facility, the idea, as I was talking about, as the sectors will be rearranged going forward, that, a life science manufacturing facility would actually be in the industrial category, whereas a traditional life science facility that behaves more like an office asset will be categorized in the office category.
It would include things like laboratories,
Yeah.
like you need to get a blood draw.
Yeah. And so one more comment, I guess, about the queue that I would point out is Barings has a pro rata share approach. So if we were to say we wanted to redeem, let's say $10 million out of the fund, we would receive a pro rata share of all their distributions for any given quarter. So we would get, let's say, 1.5% of the distribution for that particular quarter.
So you're not last in line. You're
Yeah,
part
there's
of
not
the
a
pool
last in
receiving.
line
Yeah.
aspect to needing to get in the queue. We would get 1.5% of the distribution regardless.
Trustee Haschek, you had a question, comment?
Well, just looking at this, when the fund is in the bottom 3 performing fund in the OBCE index, it's way behind on the 3-year basis, the 5-year basis, 10-year basis. There's this turnover there. There's these people. A quarter of the funds are in the queue to redeem themselves. And the contribution, there's no one trying to get in. It just seems like a loser.
So one of the goals of our discussion today as we keep going is to decide if you want to maintain the existing managers or if you want to make a change. You can either add a manager to diversify your existing portfolio, or you could decide to redeem from Barings completely. So that's part of the discussion today.
Well, so let me comment to some of that. Very few real estate managers have a queue right now. So the fact
Inbound
that
queue.
A contribution queue.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's a zero or low contribution queue, that's not particularly uncommon. What about the performance in the last year? How's that been?
Yeah, I mean, that's 1 year. But
Yeah,
overall,
sure.
it's been.
Well, and so I can tell you, because I have access to the return streams, that longer term return is affected by 2 quarters of negative returns. If you were to take those 2 negative quarters out of the return stream, now Barings all of a sudden doesn't look quite that bad in terms of that long-term historical performance, right? Barings performance on those longer-term time frames is being dragged down by 2 recent quarters of performance, is what I'm telling you.
If we go back to some of the earlier reports, Barings had very strong returns, even long-term strong returns, but then they aggressively wrote down the value of their portfolio when they had significant softening in the office market specifically. And those 2 quarters where they made huge write-downs in the value of those properties is what dragged down their return even over the 5 and 10-year period, is what he's mentioning.
Quarter 4 of 2023 and quarter 2 of 2023, significantly lower returns. But the flip side of that is once you make those write-downs and reposition the portfolio like Barings has done, now we see the recent performance, they're actually outperforming, right? They're outperforming Reef, they're outperforming the Odyssey on 4 and 5 quarter periods. So that's definitely something we want to look at. But it's just something that I want the trustees to consider when you review this.
All right. Let's keep moving forward through the presentation. I think all the points brought up are very relevant to the decisions on the table today. Barings has seen challenged performance, but they have repositioned the portfolio, which we think is a positive thing. Aaron, I'll hand it back to you to keep going with Reef.
That sounds great. So I'll keep moving along here with these overviews of each of the managers. So Reef is a much larger fund at about $12 billion in net asset value, which makes them the 5th largest fund in the Odyssey Index. So having a larger fund allows you to have greater diversification across assets, across investors. And the fund has benefited from this strategic overweight to industrial, which you can see on the bar charts on the top right here. That's something that they've maintained since really the early 2000s. So they've had an industrial overweight for longer than many of their peers, which really caught up in the mid 2010s. The fund has really benefited from this overweight position as e-commerce adoption picked up. And of course, the huge run up in industrial values throughout COVID also generated some pretty strong returns for the fund. So industrial currently comprises 45% of the portfolio. I would note that that's expected to come down marginally to closer to 40% after some near-term dispositions by the team. As far as performance, the fund has performed pretty well. It's diversified across alternative property types, so things like student housing, life sciences, medical office, single-family rental, and self-storage. So I would note that you have a little bit more alternative sector allocation here or exposure here compared to the Barings portfolio. And the redemption queue is $1.2 billion, which represents 10.5% of net asset value. Again, that compares to the 13% Odyssey average, so a little bit below the average. And the redemption queue here is really not much of a concern at this point. We can move on to the next couple slides to talk about the infrastructure funds. IFM Global Infrastructure Fund is a $60 billion fund, so much larger than the real estate funds. This is the largest infrastructure fund in the peer group of open-ended funds. The larger fund size is particularly notable in infrastructure. I just talked about diversification and what that allows in having a larger fund. That's even more noticeable in an infrastructure fund because infrastructure assets tend to be larger in size relative to real estate. Compared to peers, IFM has a pretty conservative leverage ratio at about 35%. The fund is diversified across the various sectors, as you can see from the bar chart in the top right corner. IFM has a lot of exposure to things like toll roads and airports that have more, varied cash flow profiles, which makes it more of a growth-oriented portfolio. Performance for this fund has been strong on an absolute and relative basis. No meaningful concerns about the team or the organization, so this fund remains in pretty good standing. Moving on to JP Morgan's Infrastructure Investment Fund. This is a $43 billion fund, making it the second largest open-end infrastructure fund behind IFM. The leverage ratio here is a little bit higher at about 46%, but still well within the range of the peer group. I would also note that JP Morgan focuses almost exclusively on sort of these highly regulated utilities. So the fund has very stable, sort of predictable cash flow streams. They're also well diversified, and we only show 3 major infrastructure sectors here, but those are grouped together with distribution regulated, including utilities and energy. The contracted power portfolio includes renewables and power, and then the GDP sensitive portfolio includes storage, transportation, and midstream. Once again here, no material concerns about the fund or the team. They perform pretty well with no sort of liquidity challenges, as we discussed in the real estate funds. So now that we've gone through sort of a summary of the current manager lineup, we wanted to spend some time talking about the different types of strategies and vehicles that you could consider within this portfolio before we get into some structural comments and recommendations. So this graphic just shows the risk-return spectrum of private real asset strategies. As you can imagine, as you move up the risk spectrum on the horizontal axis, you can generally expect higher returns on the vertical axis. At the core end of the spectrum, on the far left, which is where all 4 of Mendocino County's investments are, the majority of the return comes from current income as opposed to value appreciation. So this generally results in less dispersion in performance outcomes relative to some of the higher risk options like value add or opportunistic strategies. On the next slide, we'll look at a few different vehicle structures that are available for most private real assets investments. So these opportunities exist on a spectrum of liquidity on the x-axis and control on the y-axis. So currently all 4 of your investments are in open-ended funds, which gives you a pretty good mix of liquidity and control. We talked about sort of how the redemption queues work. You can request redemption on a quarterly basis for real estate funds and generally on a quarterly or semi-annual basis for infrastructure funds. Of course, you're not promised that liquidity. If there's a queue, you'll have to wait in line and it'll be paid out over multiple quarters, but you do have that sense of liquidity that you don't necessarily get from closed-end funds. If the portfolio were to move towards closed-end funds, that would add a meaningful amount of complexity, not only because of the liquidity constraints, but also having to fund capital calls, and then of course reinvesting your distributions to make sure that you stay invested in the asset class. On the other hand, separate accounts would allow for greater control. It's essentially an account built and managed by a manager just for you. But it really only makes sense for very large portfolios because of the lack of diversification. So even thinking about a $100 million or $200 million separate account, you'd likely have less than 5 assets or less than 10 assets, even with debt. So, whereas an investment in a commingled fund, like the approach currently, that gives you exposure to hundreds of underlying assets. So for those reasons, it's our belief that open-ended commingled funds continue to be a very appropriate vehicle for your plan, but we at least wanted to mention some of the other vehicle structures that are available and be able to address sort of any questions or concerns that you may have. If there are no questions there, we'll skip to the next slide here. Perfect. On this slide, we just wanted to remind you of some of the reasons why real assets is in your portfolio. That includes some of the reasons that Claire mentioned earlier, such as diversification benefits for your overall portfolio, the lower correlation of private real assets to some of the public markets asset classes, income returns, which come from the steady cash flow streams from rent payments and things like that, the potential for value appreciation, and of course inflation protection, as some of these property sectors allow you to kind of pass through that inflation to your tenants. As with any asset class, though, there are some considerations that we need to be aware of, not the least of which include illiquidity, higher fees, and implementation challenges, all of which we've sort of touched on already. So on this slide, we can spend as little or as much time as you want here. There's obviously a lot to talk about as far as headwinds and tailwinds in the real estate market. I'll try to be brief here in sort of highlighting some of these, and then of course, if you have questions about specific areas, we can expand on that a little bit. So on the headwinds side, we're of course dealing with the challenging capital markets environment as real estate owners deal with things like higher interest rates, lower availability of debt, and loans that are maturing into this environment. Focusing on office for a second, of course, we can spend all day talking about this. There's obviously been a shift in how we interact with physical office space due to hybrid and remote work. That's putting pressure on the office sector. There's also political and economic uncertainty related to various policies that will have a near-term impact on the real estate market. These are, just for example, cutbacks to the federal workforce, funding cuts to the National Institutes of Health, the impact of immigration reform, other policies that are being proposed or considered in Washington that can have a meaningful impact on real estate, either as a headwind or a tailwind. And then, of course, tariffs will give a special shout out here, just given the perceived direct impact on real estate, even with sort of pared back tariffs, that can have a pretty meaningful impact on sectors. The most notable being industrial, but also sort of knock-on effects to the other sectors. And then on the tailwind side, there's sort of this constrained new supply given lower construction, and that's a result of sort of the capital markets pullback that we discussed. If there's constrained new supply, there's less competition for existing assets, so that gives a little bit more pricing power to real estate landlords. There's also some demographic or population shifts that are benefiting real estate, including an aging population, which drives demand for healthcare-related real estate. So think life sciences, senior housing, medical office, and then of course a housing shortage and an affordability issue that's driving demand for residential sectors. And then of course industrial, despite some of the near-term headwinds with tariffs and new supply, industrial continues to benefit from several trends, including e-commerce adoption and supply chain optimization, which has been sort of a tailwind for industrial for quite some time. So if there are no questions there, we wanted to sort of, with all that background, put it all together on these next two slides with our structural proposals and recommendations. So in this slide, you'll see three structure proposals going across the top here. The first on the far left is simply to maintain the current structure of having 2 U.S. core real estate funds and 2 diversified core infrastructure funds. As we discussed, all these funds are open-ended funds and are pretty simple to implement as you have this sort of higher theoretical liquidity with the option for redemption. And so that's structure proposal 1 is really just to maintain the current structure. Structure proposal 2 is to add either 1 U.S. core real estate fund, so have a total of 3 in your portfolio to add some greater diversification across different managers, or to keep those 2 core real estate funds and add a U.S. core plus real estate fund to offer some slightly different risk characteristics. So both of these options, we kind of grouped them together because they would both be open-ended commingled funds, so there's really no impact on implementation or liquidity. And then finally, structure proposal number 3 on the far right is to add some non-US core real estate funds, which would give you exposure to places like Europe and or Asia. We envision these being sort of pan-European or pan-Asian strategies to provide a little bit greater diversification. These vehicles would also be structured as open-ended funds, so there's really no difference in liquidity. But we would note that this would add some complexity to the portfolio. This would introduce some new challenges such as currency volatility, which can have an impact on returns or if you're hedging costs. Given the size of the U.S. real estate market and the opportunities available domestically, generally we view the U.S. market as having, substantial diversification opportunities for this particular real estate portfolio, but wanted to, of course, include that structure proposal as an option for the board to consider. So with that, I'll pause and pass it to Claire, who I think is going to walk through the next slide with our summary of recommendations.
Great. Are there any questions at this point?
I have a couple questions. I don't know, about the structured proposals. I don't know if we want to go through whatever comments you might have
and then
first,
sure.
but I definitely have a couple questions, comments that I'd like the board to consider and think about.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just jump right to our recommendation. So on the next page, our recommendation is to do a search. So our recommendation is that the board would ask Callan to do a search, and kind of a two-pronged search. So looking both at core and core plus open-end funds. And there's two potential directions that you could go with that. One, you could select a third fund to add to the existing, and sorry, I'm focused on real estate specifically. We don't have any recommended changes to your infrastructure portfolio. So our recommendation is to do a search for a core or core plus open-end real estate fund to diversify your existing portfolio. And through that search, we can also kind of continue the evaluation of Barings versus the broader opportunity set. So you have Reef and Barings that we can kind of better compare within the broad opportunity set through that search process, and then decide if you want to add a third manager, if you want to replace one of your managers, and whether that third manager would be a core or core plus fund. So I'll pause there.
So my question, I guess, to Aaron and Callan here, as far as the recommendation, in terms of another core manager within the real estate sector, one of the things that Aaron mentioned was core return dispersion being very low, right? That the expected performance of another Odyssey core manager probably is going to be very similar to our other two managers. So my question, I guess, would be related to that. You know, how realistic do you think it is to expect, you know, diversifying performance from another core Odyssey fund?
Yeah, I think Aaron can probably speak to the returns part. The first thing that comes to mind for me is really looking at the exposures of your existing funds. And, you know, it would be manager diversification. So beyond just returns, it's, you know, you then have 3 managers to diversify the total dollars that you allocate to real estate. Aaron, do you want to speak to the returns component?
Yeah, Claire, I agree with your point. I would also add, we think of sort of adding another manager from a diversification perspective to be sort of a risk mitigation strategy. So, if we, you know, this sort of the couple of quarters of underperformance from Barings is a good example. You know, they're a smaller fund. These 4 office assets had a pretty substantial impact on the performance of their, you know, of the Barings fund, but also on the broader portfolio. And so I think, you know, if the real estate portfolio was diversified across 3 managers instead of 2, the impact that would have been felt from that underperformance from Barings would have been mitigated slightly just by having other managers that you know, to diversify that, you know, across. And then of course the redemption queue, you know, certain funds at certain periods of time, we've seen this from other funds, you know, separate from Barings, can run into some liquidity challenges that can give you some, you know, concern or hesitation. And so just having that diversified across, you know, an additional manager, we think could, you know, help you sleep at night a little bit better, I think, if you will.
And if there was a decision to move to, you know, add a core plus fund, we think that could have enhanced return potential.
So skipping to page 17, next page. And then the following page 18. This is something that's been discussed here and you've addressed it a little bit. If we were to look at something else, can we go about looking in the construction industry for housing?
It is not our recommendation, but Aaron, do you want to spend a few minutes on the affordable housing slide?
Yeah, definitely. I know we spent some time discussing affordable housing in prior meetings, so we sort of kept this slide brief, but happy to sort of elaborate here. Really the challenge, and there is a, you know, a growing opportunity set within affordable housing with funds sponsored by investment managers across core plus all the way up to sort of value add and opportunistic strategies. So those opportunities are out there. I think that the challenge in some cases is, you know, those funds are primarily geographically diversified, generally across the U.S. There's not necessarily a focus on any particular county, either in California or in your county, for example. So they are diversified, and you'll get access, you would get access to sort of various markets. A lot of these funds are still growing, and so there's less of a demonstrated track record from a lot of these open-ended funds. But I think generally within this portfolio, which is pretty concentrated across a handful of diversified managers, taking a separate allocation in affordable housing would be a little bit concentrated, and we'd have to sort of weigh the overweight that you'd have to affordable housing relative to the other property sectors, and evaluate if that's something that is accretive or attractive for the trustees in this portfolio.
What if the word affordable was taken off of that? Would that change the view of it?
So I know in the past there's been, go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, I was just clarifying the question was if you take out the word affordable, so just focus on sort of market rate housing or residential broadly?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be, so your portfolio right now includes market rate apartments across, each of the real estate managers. And then, of course, as we mentioned, there's some other residential exposure, particularly in DWS's portfolio, in single family rental and in student housing. So there is a little bit of diversification across the residential property types within your portfolio already. So I think, adding another, let's say, a multifamily fund or a residential fund, if you wanted to take sort of a strategic overweight to the housing sector, that's something that we could discuss. But from a diversification perspective, it is a little bit duplicative with what you already have in the portfolio.
So what I would jump in and say is if we were to combine the exposures for both of the funds and compare them to the Odyssey, we're about 93 basis points as of the last quarter overexposed to residential broadly. So a slight overweight in potentially a supply-constrained demographic tailwind sector, probably not the worst thing to consider if I'm being biased about that. Sort of what actually concerns me more when we look at the total portfolio is actually the industrial overweight. So something that I've talked about in my update memos to real estate to the board has been this recent oversupply within the sector. And so, the contrarian in me is sort of questioning whether or not we would want to maintain that significant overweight going forward.
The tariffs are going to fix all that. Everybody's going to build stuff.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen, But to your point, Trustee Shoemaker, we already do have a slight overweight to residential broadly, apartments, single-family housing at the highest level.
Right. So I guess to me, it's you start coming down from the satellite down into California, down into Northern California, and are there legit opportunistic? That was one of the little steps we had in the earlier part of the presentation for that kind of development. We have a subdivision out here that's been approved twice and nobody's built on it. Of course, they understand their own market and their own assets and why it's not going or is going. But homes aren't failing to move right now at pretty good prices. And so up in those stocks, and I don't know if one of the questions I didn't bring up was, are these all acquisition companies, or are any of them in the process of development?
So when you say development, to me, I'm thinking a plot of land and somebody's going to go out and build an actual building. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
So as far as that strategy, that is way more out on the risk spectrum. If you go back to page 11, correct me if I'm wrong, Callan, but I think that sort of development strategy is out in the opportunistic region, right? Yeah. So so some of one of the challenges that I think Callan would bring up, which they point out here on that slide on slide 11, is the closed-end structure. So that would be one thing to consider. Not only is there the operational risk, right, of building. I mean, not that Callan wouldn't, I wouldn't suggest that we were to build something or invest in a fund building something in Ukiah. But imagine trying to build something in Ukiah as a manager, the operational risk that is involved in getting the permitting, having the water, getting all the connections, the whole thing, right? And then dealing with the leasing aspect and then running the property, right?
Well, okay, so
It's a challenge.
I will take a minute here again. I noted there's one subdivision that all those things have been solved except going and getting building.
Yeah, I think, you know,
That type of thing is evident in other places in Northern California.
I think it could be a real challenge to, there has been some discussion at this board of local direct real estate investment, and I think it could be a challenge to be a landlord directly. And then if we're talking about the fund structure, I think the opportunities for those, you know, very narrowly focused development opportunities are or funds are slim. I don't know about the universe there.
I don't
Yeah.
want us to be a landlord, but the bonding opportunities or return opportunities explored, and you state other of your clients are looking at this. Bring us the case studies. Show us the case studies. You know, have they all rejected it? Have they bought in? What have they found that we don't want to find? What have they found we do want to find? So let's, and I guess you're asking if we want to go out and search for a third. I'm just saying, let's go out and search for a third and see what it is.
So what I would like is to have that third be way up the scale on the opportunity. Why add another one that's identical to the two we've already got? Why look at even those guys? You know, if we're going to stick with those two for a while, stick with those two and look for something really different, way up the scale,
And to get here,
and then just bring the risks and rewards possible.
and we could take
for
the
those
industrial money out.
Well,
Put it over there.
and so going back to the one final thing on the development for residential Reef, and one of the things that I brought up in my real estate memo to the board, Reef has over $800 million right now, which is relatively small for their fund, right? Almost a 10% of their fund in the residential development pipeline right now today, right? That's going to take a year and a half to actually develop those properties, but you know, Reef is sort of looking at that, and they specifically make that a point of the strategy. You know, they're underweight residential today versus the Odyssey. They want to be overweight. They're spending $800 million over the next 2 years, let's call it, to build properties in Florida, Phoenix, and the LA area.
By the way, that subdivision is currently for sale.
You want to buy it?
Well, no, call them. Tell them about it.
Yeah, so that's to say that we do have a little bit of that. Now, it's very small. It's 2 or 3% of the total fund money that we have between both investments. So it doesn't preclude the suggestions from both trustees, but just be aware that there is that specific development in the pipeline today.
and I think Robert made a great point about the fund structure being important. So opportunistic here on this chart is noted, available via closed-end fund structures and not, so that's a different vehicle type than is currently available in the plan.
And in general, I would like to hear the word international pop up again, because that's real diversification rather than what people, it's been said forever, diversification is not having your money in 3 different banks. So,
Yeah, on the international front, our perspective is, I guess I go back to the total portfolio level, right? This is the role of real estate in your portfolio is to be a diversifier to your equity allocation. And I think it does that, and noting that the US market is the largest in the world for real estate investment in this construct, I don't I think there's enough diversification opportunity there without going outside the U.S. to identify an Asia-specific fund and a Europe-specific fund. So that's my perspective on that piece, but certainly diversification opportunity is there with non-U.S. as well.
Trustee Swope?
Historical point, did Shorenstein completely eliminate his holdings?
I'll pass that to Aaron.
Sorry, Shorenstein?
Yes, the Bank of America building was purchased by Shorenstein, and then it was purchased by Vornado. Did Shorenstein completely liquidate all their real estate holdings?
No, Shorenstein Properties is still sort of an active real estate manager, particularly in office properties.
Thank you.
So I have another kind of question that I guess I would throw to Callan for the board's consideration. You know, something that I wonder about when we're looking at value add or opportunistic strategies here within real estate is the income to appreciation. You know, now we're getting, let's call it 3.5% income distribution from our current funds. Should we consider, you know, the potential lack of income in any new investment within the value add or opportunistic buckets? How important would that be, in your opinion, for us?
I think the important part for your portfolio is that you're a total return investor. So the source of the return between income and appreciation is less important than the total return perspective. So when you need a dividend, you effectively sell part of your holding to generate your own dividend in a way.
Will you repeat that?
Yeah, we talk about the split between income and appreciation on this slide. And I would emphasize, you know, I agree with Claire's comments. The kind of reason we highlighted here is that income is sort of a lower risk, that's the low risk part of the return that you'd get, right? Because you're getting that from tenants that are paying rent essentially, right? So you're getting the rent, you're paying your own expenses, or the fund manager's paying their expenses, and then that income gets distributed. Whereas the appreciation component is dependent on the market. So if interest rates increase, as we saw a couple of years ago, you lose a lot of that appreciation, or will have negative appreciation. So strategies that are more dependent on appreciation just tend to be more volatile and you know, higher up on the risk spectrum. So that's how I would think of that split.
Now, interestingly, to that point, if you go back and think about our meetings, you know, 5 years ago when we were looking at the returns of your real estate managers, we were commenting that appreciation was kind of dominating the returns, and we would have expected income to be kind of the larger portion of your core manager real estate returns. So that was flipped a number of years ago as we saw significant gains in appreciation over income, and that kind of normalized more to income becoming a larger portion of that.
Okay, so I think we've reached the point here where we should launch into an actual discussion about whether we want to make a move. There would have to be a motion in order to move to one of these other go ahead, Trustee Shoemaker.
I don't know, is it just a request for more information? I would suggest if you want something for action, I guess it's, we don't make any changes. What we have, we monitor, what is it?
Variance.
And that we look for more information about other agencies that might be putting money into housing or affordable housing. No changes to current portfolio.
My question with this item about opening up for a new manager at this time is that we know that it takes a little bit of time. If we did go with that, it takes a little bit of time to liquidate assets and to reallocate them. And I know that we're going to have a full study, I believe, in a year, in which we look at the entire asset, the entire structure. And if we were to change, it seems like we might have two conflicting things. Even if they came back immediately in the next 3 months with some managers, and we selected one and we move forward, then we'd have to find a way to balance and get into it, and then we'd be right on right on the bigger discussion of our entire portfolio. So how does that work?
In terms of asset liability study that we would be doing, let's say a year from now, sort of what's Callan's expectation? Let's just say we added a new opportunistic closed-end fund just for the fun of it to make it more complicated, right? What sort of would your expectation be for the asset liability study, considering there's this sort of lagging, you know?
Yeah, I mean, my expectation would be that the total portfolio target to real assets doesn't change dramatically through an asset liability study process. That would be my expectation.
2 or 3% potentially up or down.
Absorbable within.
I don't foresee us recommending that you get rid of it by any means. And so if it's going to be in the portfolio, it's going to be a reasonable allocation of assets.
And I guess the other comment I would have is obviously everyone here has been looking at Barings and been concerned. All of the numbers that I've seen from them from the day I joined have been questionable, and they don't seem to be getting better. And I understand there are circumstances around that. But at some point, when you see that 31% of people are attempting to withdraw, I guess that's in not of people, but in total assets, are attempting to pull that money out. That number gets bigger. If it gets 50 or 70, what happens then? There could be a last rat on the ship situation. I know that's kind of far-fetched, but how would we, knowing what we know now, why wouldn't we be seriously looking at exiting Barings?
I would point out that their most recent one-year performance, they did outperform the index and were the best performing real estate holding that we had. Now, granted, their 3 and 5 year numbers are terrible in a way because they were so aggressive in writing down their portfolios, especially the office properties coming out of COVID. So you're right. The long-term numbers don't necessarily look good, but they've done a lot to restructure their portfolio, and you would expect that you would see their return sort of revert towards the mean, in my opinion, but you can comment on that.
Well, so let's say we go with Callan's proposal, right? Let's say we just, for the sake of argument, that process, right, is going to take us some time to get, let's call it $20 million into a new manager. That's whether the fund closes tomorrow or closes in 2 years. It's not going to make a market difference for us in terms of when we're going to be able to get any funds out. So I think, sort of considering it in this doom scenario, I don't really know what benefit we get from that. Whether there's a complete doom scenario or everything turns around and then there's a 9% net return for the next year in Barings, it's not going to make a material difference for the amount of money we can get out of the fund.
Yeah, so the losses on those office portfolios are baked, right? They wrote them down to the loan value out of the
They don't have them anymore.
Yeah,
they have
so
two,
that's
they
baked
have
into
3 buildings completely in what you would say life science and 2 commercial office buildings. That's all they've got.
I guess the number I'm more worried about is that 31%. The Q, yeah.
That's higher than peers.
That's 3 times higher than the average.
It's high.
And it might be that there's just a lot of boards like us look at this, see a big crooked red number and say, get me out of there. I want to go somewhere else. They could be, but you can't expect that all of them knee jerk. There has to be a reason why that many people want out. And that much money is flowing out. That would be a concern of mine. I know that's not what this discussion is about, but I have to bring it up.
That would be the question for Aaron, actually. He probably speaks with a lot of other boards. He probably's got his finger on the pulse.
I guess the question would be, why is there a 31% redemption queue?
Yeah, so I agree. I think a lot of these redemption requests came in before, as a result of some of these office challenges and investors kind of looking to get some liquidity from that fund as the fund was going through this sort of challenge performance. So far, after the Artemis transaction and after some of the recent departures, we haven't yet seen a significant increase in redemption requests within this fund, but that is something that we're watching to see what the reaction is of other investors and boards that are meeting and having similar discussions. What I would say is that I'm pulling up some stats here. So the queue, about 640 million, about 60% of that are full redemptions. So we kind of use full redemptions as a proxy for, okay, these investors that are putting in a full redemption request probably want to get out of the fund entirely. Whereas 40% of the redemption requests are partial redemption. So of course we are using that as a proxy. We don't know for sure what each individual investor's motivations are. So that's kind of our estimate of 60% definitely want to get out. 40% are kind of looking to take some chips off the table and or are using this redemption request as somewhat of an option where you can put in a request, get your pro rata share of redemption proceeds as Barings pays it out, and then potentially rescind your requests if Barings turns it around and you want to stay in the fund, or continue to remain in the redemption queue and receive the rest of your pro rata proceeds as they pay out the fund entirely. So I think the motivation for some investors is the latter, like trying to some people say to game the system, right? Like request the redemption, even if you don't necessarily need the whole thing, because you want to get your pro rata share and then kind of see how it goes. So I think that's part of the motivation for some of these funds that have seen larger redemptions, larger redemption queues, and investors that kind of are 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
The other thing I would note about our recommendation to do a search is you don't have to make a change at the end of that search. So it's an opportunity to do additional due diligence on the opportunity set and then decide from there how you want to move forward with the portfolio.
Sure. It's difficult when you're given options, though.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to make a decision. Usually you're in one meeting, and there'll be options in front of you, and all of a sudden you're in a fund, and maybe you didn't want to be if you don't stop it here. I'm not saying that I want to stop it here, but I'm telling you why people might want to stop it here.
We've done that numerous times and decided to not make a change. And I think the structure proposal 2, if we were to give that direction to Callan, opens the door for many different opportunities. And I get that there's no recommendation to change anything about our core infrastructure, but adding one U.S. core or core plus, I think could open the opportunity to invite Barings here and talk to them about some of these concerns. Because I think they're going to represent this as we rip the Band-Aid off. We weren't trying to smooth this out over any type of period. We ripped the Band-Aid off. We have a restart layer. This is what we are now. And this is how our performance has been since we ripped the Band-Aid off. But I think proposal 2 offers that let's talk to those core, the U.S. core, to include Barings if they want to come to the table, and even pursue a core plus to see if we might want to replace those. Because it could be any combination of 3 U.S. core, 2 core, and a plus, or we go 1 core, 1 plus, or any variation in between once we talk to those companies, determine what flavor we like. But if we don't ask, we'll never find out.
So would I take that is a motion to?
I thought it was just direction that they need.
Oh, direction, yeah. I guess we don't need a motion because we're not actually changing anything.
Well, it does. The notes I have here does specify a motion would be required.
Is that correct, Jeff, or would this just be direction? Because we're not selection of a manager. We just want them to bring back consideration of some of the different options available.
What I heard Trustee Cromer talk about sounds like you're looking like direction to me.
Yeah, I think we agendized it as action, but I think it should have been agendized as direction.
Okay. Trustee Kelly.
Am I the only person that wants to see some international exposure? If so,
I would comment on that.
I also have a comment on that. I think, so just at the highest, most basic level, I think what we would see in terms of return stream performance is we would see a dampening of the total portfolio volatility, right? Because we're going to be having we're going to have potentially another benchmark, another region that's got different risk exposures that are going to act differently. And we would probably also likely see lower total return streams. So in the U.S., we might expect over the next 2 or 3 or 5 years, 7 to 9% total return. Whereas if we were to look somewhere else, we might expect 5 to 7% total returns. So that's sort of something that I would mention to the board as a consideration.
Oh, I would just say that on the international real estate, I would not be particularly interested in moving money there at this time. For the reasons that Claire was saying, the U.S. is a very big market, but I'm a little bit afraid of just the geopolitical circumstances that appear to be going on right now. I'd like to keep it local, not local, but North American, not local. I don't trust Ukiah any more than anyone else does, but local as in, United States, domestic. And it sounds to me like there is not a deep consensus, but we do want to, since we're not going to be taking a motion, it would appear like there's enough people who are interested. I know staff seems to be interested in entertaining option 2, proposal 2, as direction. And is there any comments on that?
Did trustee have to?
Oh,
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, why wouldn't we do this? Is there an additional cost for Callan to do this kind of research, or? So it seems like we should get the information, right?
Yeah, I mean, from what Trustee Cromer was saying about, we don't have to vote on this, or we don't have to accept a new manager. We could keep the same structure, go through this process, waste their time. But it wouldn't be a waste of time.
It's not a waste of time.
It's practice. It's practice.
Research.
Right. And also the point that we can bring Bearings in, and maybe they can try to lobby for trying to keep us with them. And it would be, they would need to do that at some point in my mind. Because it is what it is. People are jumping. There's got to be a reason. So it sounds like we will.
We will bring back a
yes.
search for a core and looking at the Core Plus universe as well. And we can
like
evaluate.
Core Plus myself,
Okay.
but I don't think we specified which flavor exactly, other than probably not international. Sorry, Trustee.
So would you like to look at Core and Core Plus?
Yeah, let's look at core and core plus, because that's
Can
the
we-
most.
Yes.
Can we ask Robert to look around at the other Searles for local investment? Local housing or regional housing? Email everybody what anybody doing here.
I thought we did that with Sonoma County previously.
That's one county.
I don't remember that specifically. Sonoma
Trustee Journey's
County.
request, I believe.
Are you talking about infrastructure?
No, I was talking about real estate. I thought we did, but I might be mistaken.
I'm not remembering that.
To address Trustee Shoemaker's interest in maybe some way to facilitate local housing, I would be happy to bring you some information on how Fresno did it via loan availability through the RBC banking product, which did give them some exposure to their local market in sort of a custom product that they put together, but without owning actual assets, because you're just facilitating some funding. And maybe that would be a better way of looking at some of those, because then those mortgages, those loans kind of get resold, and you can get in and out of it much more easily than something like where you own the asset and you may be stuck in it with a long redemption queue, or in a closed-end fund where you can't get your money out for 7 to 10 years or something like that. So there might be other vehicles and avenues to address maybe some of that desire for some aspect of local real estate support without it actually being development or owning actual real estate.
Well, so what Doris is talking about is really on the debt side, and Richard, Trustee Shoemaker, you've mentioned that in the past. An interest in housing bonds and different sort of revenue-related, agency-related bonds within the housing sector. That's really on the debt side.
Yes.
Which
Yeah,
isn't necessarily what this discussion has been about. This discussion's been on the equity side, and in fact, slide 20 shows some of that. If you were to look at slide 20 of the presentation, and so you can kind of see this equity debt split between public and private portions of the market. So this is an equity discussion. This isn't necessarily a debt discussion.
No, I'm not asking you to look at that, but asking you to look at equity.
Okay.
And not necessarily for ownership of a building.
Okay,
Other funds that do what these guys kind of do.
which is an equity ownership.
Well, in a way of stock, we are not the landlord per se, any of these.
Okay,
Okay.
I think we have the direction. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, the clock is moving. Do we want to jump right into item B and C, which I believe we're going to take together? Performance report, or do we want to take a break?
Did you want to address whether we move through that or go to IFM now?
We do have IFM in the waiting room, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
It's
So
up to you. They're here.
Well,
It's up to you.
either way, somebody has to wait. So, do we need to take a break for a little while here? I did hear some yeses. I want to make sure that we're not torturing anybody.
Are there a lot of questions about B and C?
As Claire mentioned in her opening comments, it was generally a good story. Despite all the volatility, the portfolio outperformed for the last quarter and for.
All right, let's just get right into B and C then. Quarterly
Yeah.
investment performance report, Callan.
You convinced me.
All right, we'll just get right into that.
Hello, everyone. How are you? So, do we want to move through this relatively quickly? Or we'll give it the necessary time, but maybe not dwell on things too much?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. So we'll provide an update of performance through the end of the first quarter. We also have the flash report through April. And as you see on the first slide here, this is what the world looked like at the end of March. And notably, March was before April. And April is when the tariffs were announced, right? And that's when yeah?
I just want to make sure, are we in the quarterly summary report, not the quarterly full report?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Yeah, thank you. So a lot of the drama that we saw in April had yet to be felt in these numbers, but notably, the U.S. market was already down. So we had negative returns in February and March, all before the whole drama with the tariffs and Liberation Day. And that's interesting, and we kind of forget some of the themes that were going on at that time. You know, the consideration of, China actually starting to be further ahead than us in AI, right? You remember the whole question about that? So that was weighing on the equity markets in the first quarter. Another important thing to note in the first quarter is international equity markets outperformed U.S. markets by about 10%. And that's one of the biggest gaps we've seen in a decade of international outperforming the U.S. This is a long time coming, right? Today, the U.S. equity valuation sit at about 23 times earnings. For the broad U.S. equity market, that's a little bit high. We need to have exceptional growth going forward to really sustain that, and for the U.S. to, continue to outpace international markets. International market valuations are about 50% less than that, right? My math is it's about 33% less. So the U.S. is 50% more of international on a PE basis. And the big question right now is, well, will the U.S. remain exceptional on a go-forward basis? And U.S. exceptionalism, that's a term that people use in the finance markets, investment markets. It means that our GDP growth remains robust, our U.S. dollar remains the reserve currency of the world, interest rates remain low, because we are unique in the way we operate our economy and the institutions that we have, right? And a number of that is starting to come under question right now. And when the tariffs were first announced, one of the big first reactions was interest rates actually going up, right? Interest rates went up so quickly and so much, and that became a real problem for the United States. Because higher interest rates means it's more expensive to borrow money, and that's true for us individually, whether we have a mortgage or want to get a new mortgage. We talked about real estate a little bit. Take a look at what's going on in Denver and Austin and Tampa right now in terms of housing. Prices are not going up. They're going down right now, actually, which is kind of interesting. So interest rates go up for people who borrow money for themselves. They go up for companies who want to invest, and they go up for the government. And we're talking about running a 7% deficit with the big beautiful bill coming out. So that's pretty expensive to finance. And if we have higher interest rates, the interest burden for individuals, for corporations, and for the government goes up. So that's one of the biggest headwinds we have on a go-forward basis for U.S. exceptionalism. Well, back to the first quarter. So we saw the start of the sell-off in the U.S. equity market. You saw the global equity market actually doing really well. And the bond market for this time period had a pretty good run. On a year-to-date basis today, as of yesterday, is the U.S. equity market up or down? What do you guys think?
Year to date?
Year to date, right now.
It's up.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like we started the first quarter, it was down 4 to 5%, and today it's up after all of the drama in April, right? International markets are actually up even more, up about 10%. And the bond market gave up a little bit of ground since the end of this report, but it's still up about 1.5%. So all that means is that today the assets are higher than they were at the end of the first quarter, even though it's been quite a bumpy ride getting there. I'll talk about just one more chart here before I hand it off to Hannah, who will, on the next slide, who will talk specifically about the performance. These charts we always take a look at because these are the economic underpinnings that should drive capital markets over the long run. We look at GDP, inflation expectation, and yields, right? So on the upper left-hand chart here, we're looking at GDP, and GDP actually came in negative in the first quarter. So the amount of stuff that we buy and sell in the United States is less in the first quarter than it was in the fourth quarter. Right, that's what GDP measures. But notably, what really dragged that down was imports. So a lot of people anticipated tariffs, and they actually went out and they bought imports before the end of the first quarter. And the way you calculate GDP is you say, okay, what's everyone in this room go out and buy for the quarter? But if we bought it from overseas, you got to subtract that and what the U.S. produced, right? So imports is a minus, exports is a plus. And because of the tariffs, we imported a whole lot of things anticipating that, and we actually had a negative GDP print in the first quarter. Now, on a go-forward basis, what's this going to look like? We don't know. There's a whole lot of talk about soft data versus hard data right now. Soft data is things like surveys and sentiment and stuff like that. All really negative right now. But what we're going to have to wait and see is, okay, what comes through in the numbers? what actually happens with GDP going forward, what actually happens with trade going forward. But right now, sentiment is really negative, and you see it in things like the ISM survey, right? There are these surveys that people look at all the time. That soft data, we're waiting to see what happens actually with hard data on a go-forward basis.
Question, with the reduction of some of the technical staff in the Doge purging, what is going to affect, or how is that going to affect the surveys, like the statistical surveys?
Yeah, will we still be able to, have good numbers to look at? I hope so. I hope so. But with the whole Doge thing, that's another interesting thing. I anecdotally know people who are not working today that would have been working because they had a government contract, right? And so that is a bit of a headwind on employment on a go-forward basis. And if you're not employed, you're not buying things, right? But hopefully the data integrity remains. But I understand where you're coming from with that question. Inflation expectations remain pretty solid at about 2.5% on a go-forward basis. So I think that's a good story, but we'll have to see if inflation continues to come down. So that's a little bit of the economic environment. Things feel heavy. Things feel difficult right now. But lo and behold, the capital markets are actually up, though, and your portfolio continues to grow. I'll flip it over to Hannah, who will start walking through your performance. And you're going to start on slide 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. All right, so this is looking at the total plan portfolio. You can see the top graph, the portfolio is about flat for the quarter, and the bottom half of the page looks at the fiscal year to date, so the previous 3 quarters. As of the end of the first quarter, the total portfolio was about $739.5 million, and it was up about $24 million over the course of the fiscal year to date. On the next slide, we look at the portfolio versus its target. It remains on target, slightly underweight domestic equity and domestic real estate, but all within policy target. We can jump ahead a few slides. I think it's 14. One more, please. This looks at the detailed asset allocation, looking at the market values of each fund within the portfolio. So in total, as of the end of the first quarter, the market value was about $739.5 million, about flat over the course of the quarter, but we did see positive investment returns to the tune of about $3.4 million, which covered your benefit payments for the quarter. So the portfolio is up. If you look at the investment return column, you'll notice all of the red is in domestic equity. Domestic equity, as Greg mentioned, sold off. But the remaining portions of the portfolio, like international, domestic, infrastructure, real estate, all performed well and were additive over that time period. Looking at the total fund performance versus the Callan Public Fund peer group, for the last quarter, the total fund was up 42 basis points, outperforming the total fund benchmark, which was up 27 basis points, and landing in the top quartile versus peers. So strong quarter, even though we saw really negative headlines throughout the quarter, but it was strong for the portfolio. And over long-term periods, the portfolio has held up really well. Over the last 5 years, ranking in the top quartile, up 11.2%, outperforming the target. Really strong 10 to 15-year returns as well. So the portfolio has done really well over long-term time periods. You can take a quick look at individual manager performance or the asset categories. I think it's on slide 20. Or one more slide, please. Sorry, I think they're off by one. So looking at the total portfolio, as I mentioned, it's up 42 basis points for the last quarter. Looking at each asset class category, your domestic equity was down about 5.2%. It did underperform the broad Russell 3000 index, and that's mostly due to the small cap overweight. Small cap was the worst performing asset category for the quarter. International, strong quarter, up 5.6%. As Greg mentioned, we saw international outperform domestic markets, and all of your active managers, with the exception of your Pacific Growth, actually outperformed their respective benchmarks. For fixed income, was also additive, up 3.2%, outperforming the Bloomberg aggregate, 2.8% return. Infrastructure, positive, up 2.8%, and same with real estate, up 1.5% for the last quarter, all contributing to the fund's outperformance versus the policy target. Unless there are any individual manager questions, but we don't have any concerns with this quarter's performance, and we think it held up pretty well.
Okay, is that the end of B and C?
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
we can
okay.
briefly mention April. April was up 68 basis points for the
love
month.
what April is right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we also, I'll note, Robert we started the international equity transition. We added the passive State Street Index. So that started to be funded in April.
Okay.
And I would also chime in that we're going to fund the majority of the rest of that by the end of the month and in the first couple days of June, and we'll be completely transitioned. So that'll be good.
Do we have any other comments or board discussion on items B and C quarterly? I'm going to see if we have any public comment at this time, assuming that IMF wants to come and tell us to hurry up. Perfect time for them to do that.
There is none.
Okay, I guess that's the end of B and C, and we move on to D, IMF. And perhaps now would be a good time to let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
I mean, unless they're all ready to go, they're probably going to need to set up.
They're out there ready. If trustees, it's
Let's take
probably another 45-minute
Let's take a 10-minute break.
discussion.
I'll come back at 11:15.
Say I'm gonna quit.
What's that? Yeah.
Thank you guys both.
Bye.
So,
Yeah, right.
yeah, it's turned on. Take a seat and
That is, yeah.
that in. Yeah, and so just maybe try to speak up a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah.
That mic is on, and so it should just pick you up while you speak normally.
Yeah,
A little
that
louder.
was the highlight of my career here. The ultimate. If you don't do that, I'm gonna quit. Nobody was fun. It's just like, oh, don't let this screen door. Yeah.
Anybody wants one?
I know you want that. I know you want this here.
Do we have this on,
Yeah, it's the same one.
Same one on
Yeah.
mine.
Well,
although it's not,
Good?
okay.
Extras?
Great.
I thought I had opened it up here, but I did not. And that will be. I will keep it. Okay, I guess we're close enough to 11:15. If Scott is ready, we can resume. And this is IFM Infrastructure Resilience and Transport Sector Update. Lisa Friedman and David Selbinder.
Hi everybody, it's nice to meet you. I'm Lisa Friedman. I have worked with institutional allocators like yourselves for about 20 years now across various alternative asset classes. And I joined IFM last year to focus on our West Coast clients, including Mendocino County. And with that, let me pass it over to David to introduce himself.
Hi, great to be with you all today. I'm Dave Sealbinder. I'm an investment director in the investment infrastructure equity team in New York for IFM. I've been with IFM for about 12 years, covering a range of businesses and sectors during that time. My focus over the last decade or so has been mostly on transportation, so excited to have that conversation with you today.
So I'll provide a brief update on the firm itself and our developments, and then pass it over to David to talk about infrastructure overall and the transportation sector in particular. So on page 6, if you would like to follow along, we continue to be fully owned by institutional allocators, and the recent news on the ownership front is that a UK pension fund, the largest in terms of its members, Nest, has joined our Australian owners as a shareholder earlier this year. And as of the end of Q1, we have been managing about $145 billion in assets under management, $77 billion of which is in infrastructure equity. And then the fund that Mendocino County invests in is specifically global infrastructure equity. As of the end of this quarter, it manages about $73 billion. And it's a global fund, so it's supported by our team globally. We have 13 offices around the world, and we seek opportunities across different geographies and subsectors. So on page 8, you see a snapshot of the investor base of IFM. So we manage assets on behalf of investors based in different geographies. About a third of our investors in terms of assets are located in the US, despite us originally being supported by Australian allocators. And about a third of our assets are managed on behalf of public pension funds like yourselves. On page 10, you see a snapshot of our team. So there are over 140 investment professionals supporting global infrastructure, research, and investments. And on average, the tenure at IFM Investors of our senior investment professionals is 10 years. So it's a stable team within IFM, and those same professionals have over 20 years on average of industry experience. Do you have any questions so far?
Great.
If not, I'll pass it over to David to talk about the actual investments.
Yep. So I'll talk a little bit about the fund and the strategy. So IFM Global Infrastructure Fund is an infrastructure fund primarily investing in OECD or developed countries, building a diversified portfolio. So we invest across 3 key subsectors. That's utilities, so things like gas and electric, water, energy, so terminals, pipelines, and liquefied natural gas, and transportation, such as toll roads, airports, and seaports, which we'll talk a little bit about today. We look for a number of characteristics when we invest in assets, which are at the bottom of the slide here, but I'll just highlight a few. First and foremost is strong market positions and high barriers to entry. These tend to be assets that don't have a lot of competition, and they would be very hard to replicate at any given time. So you think of an airport in a major city, it's quite hard to build another airport in a major city, which provides a very good position and provides that stability of cash flows that you'd be looking for in infrastructure assets. Second is a long asset life or concession life. These infrastructure assets tend to be around for a long time. We try to buy assets or own assets outright into perpetuity, or we have long-term concessions. So for example, our Sydney Airport concession, we will operate that airport until 2097, and our Indiana toll road business, we will operate until 2081. So these are long-term assets. Third and final one I'll highlight is inflation protection. That's one of the benefits you get with an infrastructure portfolio. Typically that is through the revenue mechanism or the price increase mechanism of these assets. They tend to have some direct linkage to inflation. So for example, our toll road assets often include an ability to increase tolls each year by at least inflation or some metric tied to inflation over time. Moving to the strategy, there's 3 pillars to it, and it sounds quite simple, but a lot of work goes into this and doing it well. So first is buying well. We have, as Lisa said, about 150 people outsourcing transactions at any given time. We also have very deep experience in the infrastructure space. The Global Fund has been around since the mid-2000s, and as a result of that, we have relationships across investment banks, other investors like ourselves, strategic entities, and what that means is that there's really an opportunity that comes to market that we haven't looked at previously at some point, or it hasn't passed our desk at some point or another. Also, the open-ended structure of the fund makes us a great partner for both governments and strategic entities. Unlike a closed-end fund who have to exit their investment over the next, call it 10 years or 5 years, when we enter a partnership with a government entity or a strategic entity, they know we're going to be their partner for the long term. So that's really attractive for them, and it opens up a lot of opportunities for us. Second pillar of the strategy is managing intensively. These are not set it and forget it assets. We do a lot to really drive value where we can. First and foremost, that happens through our board representation. So whenever we acquire an asset, we seek board representation. We have more than 90 board seats across IFM assets, which we use to set capital budgets, revenue budgets, operating budgets. But that's just the top level. We get actually deeply involved at many of our assets as well. So we have lots of expertise running financings. So when our infrastructure assets need to do a refinancing or a new financing, they may only do a financing once every 2-3 years. At IFM, we have many of those across the portfolio at any given time. We have strong banking relationships. We can really help them leverage, we can leverage those relationships to drive great outcomes for our assets. And finally, we'll be deeply involved in special projects. So for example, mergers and acquisitions. Our Aliatica business acquired a toll road in Italy, and we were deeply involved in that entire process from start to finish to make that happen and drive value. Third and final piece is selling opportunistically. We are an open-ended fund, which means that we have no need to exit our assets at any given time. But that said, we will often look to exit assets if we think there's a good pricing reason to, so we get a price that's quite high, or we want to diversify the portfolio. We've done this time and time again, through our fund life. Most recently, an example, we acquired a business called Global Container Terminals back in 2018. That had 2 container terminals in the Port of Vancouver, 2 in New York, New Jersey. On the back of COVID, people were shipping a lot of goods. The New York, New Jersey terminals were sort of non-core to that business, and we looked to exit that business, which we did at a high premium to where we were holding the asset. So a great outcome. Moving to the next slide, I won't spend too much time on this, but this is just the benefits to investors like yourselves of an open-ended fund. As I said, I'll just highlight a few. From a sourcing perspective, it's quite helpful for us to be open-ended, which allows people like yourselves access to great transactions, given that structure. But from an investor perspective, there's no J-curve, so you can sort of come into the asset, and when you come in to the full portfolio, so 23 assets at a time, and you also have access to liquidity as well. Moving to slide 14, this just shows what the portfolio looks like today. We have 23 assets. The portfolio is well diversified by asset, by sector, and by geography. And that really provides you, again, this sort of stability of returns you'd be looking for at any given time. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the transportation deep dive as I talk through the assets that we have in the portfolio. Yes.
What comes to mind is you might say, reconfiguration of liquid natural gas supplies, given Russia being sort of the pariah state. Could you comment on your perspective on that?
Yes, absolutely. So we invested at a company called Freeport LNG back in 2013, which was constructing a liquefied natural gas terminal. I think as many of you know, the shale revolution in the U.S. has driven the ability for the U.S. to source much of its natural gas, and we are now the largest producer of that in the world, or one of the largest, and that has created a huge excess beyond what we can utilize. So that liquefied natural gas terminal allows us to freeze down natural gas and ship it around the world. It is subject to a take-or-pay contract, so essentially we get paid whether the facility is used or not, but there are some excess cargoes that are sold sort of at spot rates. What we saw on the back of Russia invading Ukraine is many of the Europeans lost access to natural gas that they were previously getting from Russia. That put us in a great position to sell those excess cargoes because the Europeans could no longer get them from Russia and could get them from the US. So a lot of Europeans have tried to diversify their gas exposure away from Russia. Even if this conflict ends, that's a trend that will continue to play out. And from a U.S. perspective, and particularly our asset Freeport, it's a great thing.
Thank you.
Yep. I'll talk a little bit through the transportation deep dive. And the way I was going to construct this was talk a little bit about what each of the assets we have are. Some of the recent financial performance, and then the outlook. As I think many of you know, we're in a bit of an uncertain economic environment at the moment. Tariffs, being the most visible symptom of that. But I think this portfolio is really well positioned, given those uncertain environments, for a few reasons. So. We have three main subsectors within transportation. We have toll roads, airports, and seaports. And the assets we have in the portfolio are really excellent and have been built in the portfolio for over 2 decades. And the essential nature of them means that volumes are generally safe or safer relative to other investments you may have. Just because even when the economy is bad, people need to pay water bills, they pay gas, they need to drive on toll roads. So from a volumes perspective, we're pretty well insulated. And then in this particular environment, tariffs are expected to have probably a negative impact on growth, but a positive impact or increase inflation over time. And the inflation protection we have in the portfolio will essentially allow us to put those through those price increases that'll protect us from that. In the business. But overall, the transportation portfolio is well diversified by asset type, key drivers, and geographies, which really will protect your returns. So a great example of sort of how this diversification can help was in the COVID pandemic. So across the portfolio, we have a mix of assets that move either in the transportation portfolio that move either freight or move people. So think of airports would move people, ports and toll roads often would move freight. Toll roads can move people as well. But what we saw in the pandemic was we saw the movement of people essentially come to a standstill as everyone was left home. That had a negative impact on airport volumes, as you might expect. But on the other end, we saw as people stayed home, they continued to buy packages on Amazon and remodel their houses and things of that nature, which shot up freight volumes considerably. So what we saw was that while the airport volumes fell, the freight volumes in our ports businesses and some of our freight-centric toll roads increased considerably. So having that really good diversification across people moving people or moving freight was super helpful as that happened. And from the tariffs perspective, being geographically diversified is quite helpful as well. So overall, we expect the transportation portfolio to perform well in the current environment. I'll talk briefly about the assets we have. So starting with the toll roads, we have 3 toll road businesses within the portfolio. Combined, they represent about 35% of the overall fund. The first is the Indiana Toll Road. This business spans the northern part of the state of Indiana, and it connects Chicago to the Ohio Turnpike. And that positioning is really important because Chicago is really the freight hub of the United States. About 25% of all freight that moves in the United States passes through Chicago at one point on its journey. So as a result, it's a fairly freight-dominated road. It's a key corridor for people shipping goods between the U.S. Midwest and the East Coast. It has limited alternatives and strong inflation protection via its tolling increase mechanism. The second business in the portfolio is called Aleatica, which has 20 transportation concessions, 16 of which are toll roads across Europe, including the UK, Spain, and Italy, Mexico, and Latin America. A number of these businesses are situated in high-growth economies, and also 16 of the 20 businesses have significant forms of downside protection, including minimum guaranteed revenues or guaranteed rates of return. So these businesses actually operate more like a regulated utility with that guaranteed rate of return than they would like a typical demand-based toll road. And finally is our Atlas Arteria business. This has toll roads across the U.S., Germany, and France. And the key asset there is the APRR. It's a toll road network in eastern France. It's about 2,300 kilometers connecting the cities like Lyon to the French Alps. So across that portfolio, these are, again, sort of essential assets, high barriers to entry, and strong inflation protection through their tolling mechanisms. Overall, what we've seen is the toll roads continue to have strong performance, underpinned by steady traffic volumes, both for heavy and light vehicles. And they're broadly outperforming prior year results, supported by higher congestion levels and increased work-related commutes as people return to the office for more days post-COVID. And financial performance has continued to increase across the assets, mainly driven by that inflation protection included in the toll increases, as I said.
When you say you're invested in them, does it mean you own them, or?
That's a great contract. Effectively, what we own is the company that operates them. So that company has a legal agreement, typically with a state entity. So, for example, in Indiana, Indiana privatized the Indiana Toll Road in 2006. Effectively, they entered a contract with a private operator to operate the road. They lease the road, and then they have the rights to earn revenue and have to maintain the road to a certain standard. So, typically, you wouldn't own these assets outright. You would hand them back to the state at the end of the concession.
And that's the same with the airports and the ports?
Yes, for the most part, yeah. So exactly. So typically they're structured as leases with a private company who has, through that lease, the ability to earn revenues from the road.
So David, I have a question about the Indiana Toll Road. In terms of weather and performance with traffic flow, can you talk a little bit about how weather can impact something like Indiana Toll Road?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Indiana Toll Road sits on the northern part of Indiana. As you might know, the northern part of Indiana gets quite a bit of snow because of the lake effect off of Lake Michigan. So what we see every year is a sizable amount of snowfall. So we build that into our forecasts in terms of its impact on volumes, right? Sometimes we have to close the road because of heavy blizzards. But in any given year, that weather can be more severe or less severe than on average. So in some years we have it where the weather is more impactful than we expect. In others, it's less impactful, just given that snow impact. It also has an impact on costs. We do all of the maintenance in-house on the Indiana Toll Road. We often hire temporary workers for seasonal workers for the season to plow the roads. If there's more snow, there is more cost that it goes along with that. So, in any given year, that could have some impact, but it's typically not super material to the overall performance of the business, and usually only lasts from about December to call it April. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then finally, just on the outlook for the toll roads, overall, we expect these businesses to continue to perform well, given that essential nature of these assets and the inflation protection allowed in the concession agreements. But again, the roads portfolio is highly diversified across a number of geographies and types of concessions. So great performance continuing from that perspective.
I have
Yes.
actually a couple questions related to all of the toll roads here. For Atlas Arteria, can you explain or let the board know where those assets are located?
Yes. So Atlas Arteria has assets in the U.S., so it has 2 toll roads in the U.S. It has the Chicago Skyway, which is actually the connecting road to the Indiana toll road. Once you get over the Illinois state line, it turns into a toll bridge called the Chicago Skyway. It also has the Dulles Greenway, which is located in Virginia, sort of around the DC area. It has a tunnel in Rostock, Germany, as well. That's a pretty small asset in the overall portfolio. And then it has a couple of toll roads in France, the largest being the APRR, which is a 2,300 kilometer road network in eastern France.
So speaking of France,
yes,
there's been a lot that's gone on in France recently. The new finance law passed in 2025. Can you maybe mention what sort of IFM's expecting the impact to be on the French concessions?
My understanding is it's a higher tax on concession operators within France. That is currently being challenged, but the impacts of that have been flown through. Well, actually, it's valued on a P times Q basis, but that has already impacted sort of the value of the business. But we're appealing it alongside other concessionaires. But it's a negative impact on value.
And one of the largest toll road, I would think it is the largest, is Aleatica.
Yep. Broadly,
right? Can you explain to the board or talk to the board about the recent Fibromex sale?
Yes.
And the AT roadway expansion?
Yeah, great question. So as part of Aleatica, there's 20 transportation concessions overall. We acquired that business, I think it was 19 when we acquired it, and we put another business we had under the Aleatica umbrella. What we've done sort of over time with that business is we've sold down minority stakes in some of the assets, and we've taken that capital and recycled it into other businesses associated with it. So most recently, I believe in January, we closed the sale of a 18% stake in the Ghana toll road. It's one of the toll roads in Mexico. Sold that at a premium to Fiber EMX. They are essentially an investor in Mexico, like-minded, but we've continued to hold 51% of that business, so we continue to maintain control. We're able to get a favorable price for it and have put that money into AT&T. That is another toll road in Mexico. When we bought the portfolio, we would typically do not buy assets that are under construction, but as part of the broader portfolio, when we acquired it, this had a few assets that were still in construction. They were sort of smaller pieces of value. The AT&T is one of those roads that came with the entire portfolio that is currently under construction. So the funds from that one sale were put into the AT&T construction.
And what is that going to connect? What area are we talking about here?
I don't know offhand, actually. It's been a while since I've looked at it.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah. So moving to the airports, we currently have 3 airport assets across the portfolio. We have 2 in Europe and 1 in Australia. In general, airports in the U.S. Are owned by government entities, typically state or local governments. So we don't have any U.S. airport businesses within the portfolio. But generally, our strategy has been to acquire Tier 1 airports, so which we consider to be airports in strong jurisdictions with good growth prospects and favorable catchment areas. We also look for businesses with strong diversification of revenues. So typically, we look for some mix of revenue from aeronautical, so think of revenues from airlines, retail, parking, and property. And typically, we like to see a good mix of those as well. Today, airports represent about 17% of the overall portfolio. The first asset I'll talk about is Manchester Airports Group. This group owns 3 airports within the UK, Manchester Airport, London Stansted Airport, and East Midlands. Manchester Airport and London Stansted are the 3rd and 4th largest airports in the UK, while East Midlands is the 2nd largest cargo airport in the UK. And these airports have a pretty attractive catchment area where about 70% of the entire UK population lives within a 2-hour drive of one of these airports. They also have really great growth prospects because the UK's 2 largest airports are starting to reach capacity constraints, while these airports continue to have available capacity, which can be taken up at both Manchester and Stansted, where there is available capacity. Second asset in the portfolio is Vienna Airport, which is the primary airport in Australia. Austria, sorry, thank you. You work for an Australian company, you talk about Australia a lot. Given its location, it's also a gateway to Eastern Europe. The airport has strong growth potential and favorable regulation that allows you to negotiate rates directly with airlines on the aeronautical side. And overall, it's been a very strong performer in the portfolio. And the final asset I'll talk about, which is Sydney Airport in Australia. This is the largest airport in Australia by passengers. The airport acts as the premier airport in Australia and a key international destination for the island nation. And it's well located. It's only about 5 miles from the Sydney Central Business District, so quite well located. On the performance side, the fund's airports continue to experience strong demand, with traffic figures generally surpassing pre-pandemic levels, supported by strong travel demand in Europe and Southeast Asian markets. In Europe, passenger volumes have exceeded pre-pandemic levels, and both airports have shown strong passenger and revenue growth. In Australia, the recovery has been a little bit slower. Passenger volumes are still below pre-pandemic levels, where we have higher international passengers than pre-pandemic, but lower domestic passengers as the Australian airline market continues to recover. But despite those lower volumes in Sydney versus pre-pandemic, revenue and EBITDA are greatly exceeding pre-pandemic performance. It's worth noting that our Sydney Airport acquisition took place in 2022, so after the COVID pandemic. So we had included in our investment case a recovery in traffic volumes from the pre-COVID levels. In general, we see quite a favorable outlook for the airport sector, particularly around the uncertainty created by tariffs. U.S. tariffs are not expected to have a direct or immediate impact to IFM's airports, given none of them are in U.S. jurisdictions. Any impact is more likely to be felt through resulting changes in macroeconomic factors such as GDP or inflation. But overall, through COVID, the recovery from COVID has demonstrated the resilience of the sector overall, as driven by or shown by people's propensity to travel. And the perception of air travel as a necessity for people moving around. In Europe, aviation remains resilient with strong load factors and sustained demand. While airlines have experienced some aircraft delivery delays, this impact is expected to be temporary. In Australia, network growth remains strong, as evidenced by new flight services to Australian airports. Particularly, what we see in the near term is increased flight services to the Middle East, given a recent tie-up between Qatar Airways and Virgin Airways, which is one of the largest airlines in Australia. Turning to the seaports, unless there's any questions there. We have 3 port assets in the portfolio. Overall, this is one of the smallest exposures overall in the GIFT portfolio. It only comprises about 4% of the portfolio overall. Touching briefly on the assets, the first port asset is Global Container Terminals, which has 2 container terminals in the Port of Vancouver. Port of Vancouver is the largest port by volumes in Canada and is a key gateway for goods from Asia into Canadian markets. Within Port of Vancouver, GCT has a very strong market position with about a 70% share of container volumes. The Port of Vancouver serves a strong catchment area around the city of Vancouver, but also has rail links all the way far east as Toronto. So it's a key gateway for Asian goods entering the Canadian market, as well as some goods going to the U.S. Midwest. The second port in the portfolio is Mersin International Port. It's Turkey's largest import-export port. Strategically located, given its location in Turkey, between maritime shipping routes between the Mediterranean, Western Europe, the Far East, North America, and North Africa, and it's well diversified in terms of the volume it receives given its location. It has significant growth potential given the ability to expand and high population growth in the region, and its revenues are fully denominated in US dollars, and it negotiates directly with shipping lines, which is quite favorable. And then third and finally, final transportation asset in the portfolio is Baltic Hub. It's Poland's largest container port. Is the only deep water port on the Baltic Sea that is ice-free year-round, which provides it a very strong competitive position. It's also the only port in Poland which can accommodate ultra-large container vessels and can therefore receive direct calls from Asia. Over the years, container ships have gotten much, much larger and can carry much more in terms of volumes, which shippers have used to gain economies of scale. And it's really the only port on the Baltic Sea that can take those ships, which is quite favorable. And it's been one of the fastest growing ports globally, given that position. And about 75% of the revenues are denominated in euros, and it serves the Polish economy as well as other Baltic states. Turning finally to the performance and the outlook, container volumes recovered in 2024, led by strong U.S. import growth, so this is last year. However, European ports saw uneven performance due to ongoing rerouting around the Red Sea conflict in Israel. Seaports have demonstrated strong volume growth actually through 2025, even post tariffs, driven by robust demand and front loading of volumes in anticipation of those tariffs, sort of right before they came on board. And volumes remain resilient in both Turkey and Poland. Turning to the outlook, in general, geopolitical tensions, as you all know, have increased, including tariffs. The Red Sea conflict, which continues to disrupt supply chains. While tariffs may have triggered some front loading of U.S. imports in Q1, in Q2 and beyond, we expect to see some volatility given tariff policy continues to change fairly rapidly. We believe over the long term that seaborne trade is generally going to track with GDP growth. But there may be some realignment as people move flows away from China to other countries, as happened in 2019, in the prior Trump administration. But overall, we have fairly limited exposure to volumes entering the U.S. within our ports portfolio, given the international location of those ports. So overall, very helpful, and it represents a pretty small portion of the fund overall at about 4%. So that was quite a deep dive on transportation, but yeah.
So you kind of mentioned this briefly, but can you explain for the board, sort of in terms of the seaports, what factors are really driving the revenue?
Yeah.
Is there a way to broadly kind of explain that?
So there's a few. So the largest driver of revenue is it moves off of a container ship. So every time you have a box that moves into a port, and they take that box off the container ship and onto the port is able to charge a specific rate as part of that. That's the largest part of the revenue. And then there's some incremental revenue as well associated with other items. So we have charges for what's called demurrage. So it's not helpful for the port to have boxes sitting for any extended period of time, because that means we can't take boxes off of the ships when they arrive. So we charge a rate for what's called demurrage, where essentially you have a time at which you have to move the box off of the port. So those are sort of the key elements. You have contracts directly with shipping lines where you negotiate those rates, and often those rates increase according to inflation over, call it 3 to 5 year contracts.
In relation to the tariffs and shipping, do you have to administer any of those programs, tariffs? And if not, I would assume that it's possible that administering those might slow down production of containers that are actually coming in. Would that be true?
We do not administer that. They would be done by government entities, but for the U.S. tariffs in particular, given the volumes are just not going to the U.S. directly, we wouldn't administer that.
Do you administer any? I was listening to a news article yesterday about transshipping and the expected increase in going through different countries that do not have the same tariffs as some very excessive ones. Do you guys administer any?
I don't know that offhand, yeah.
That would probably be the shipping company doing that, I would think.
I don't believe so, but I don't know offhand.
I have another sort of random question that's something that's always kind of confused me a little bit with Mersin.
Yeah.
The revenues are denominated in dollars, but my understanding of the increases are linked to Turkish inflation. So I'm
revenues.
I'm like, I know they have 200% inflation one month, deflation the next month. So that's always sort of confused me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know the structure of the contracts.
The nature of all that.
Offhand. Yeah, I don't know it offhand. I'm sorry. Yeah, we can follow up with you though.
And you call out here the new MERS Hapag-Lloyd Gemini cooperation. Can you go into a little more detail about what that is, why it's important?
Yeah, exactly. So all of the shippers over time, shipping is a highly competitive business. And what shippers have done over time is they've created alliances. And what these alliances try to do is you have what was formerly a competitive shipper, and you try and essentially ship goods together, more or less. So if I have a customer who wants to ship a good, and I don't have a ship that can move you from point A to point B, I have an alliance partner who can, and then you make an alliance in that way. Over time, who is in these alliances has continued to shift around. Over the last 10 to 15 years, 2 shipping lines or 3 shipping lines will be in alliance. That shipping alliance will break up, and then they will form other alliances. So this is just another alliance that's being formed, and effectively what it does is change the route dynamics of people moving boxes from point A to point B, as part of that.
So it's good for seaport operators because it creates a consistency, right?
Seaport operators tend to be a bit indifferent. It just matters if you're coming to the port or not, but we tend to be somewhat indifferent to the alliances at any given time. The only thing I will say is we do often contract either directly with shipping lines or with the alliance. So when they form an alliance, you have a new party at which you would have to have contracts with.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So in I guess a metaphor I'll use it. In California, you get a general contractor's license. You hire subs. Subs hire people to do the job. Is that what you're doing internationally with these? You guys are contract managers.
Sorry, in what sense? For the ports, you mean?
Well, for any of this, I mean, everything you do requires personnel on site, boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And so, you guys contract with contractors, or is it the guy that's using a broom in a parkway actually work for you?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So it varies from asset to asset. So for the Indiana Toll Road, for the most part, except for major construction, right?
Yeah.
So if we need to do a major rehabilitation of 50 miles of paveway, we would hire a construction contractor. But anyone working toll booths or working, general maintenance of the roadway or in back office is actually an employee of the Indiana Toll Road operator. So
that operator is a contractor with IMF, IFM.
That operator is owned, so the equity in that company is owned by IFM.
Okay, so these companies are subsidiaries.
Yeah, essentially they'd be subsidiaries of the Global Infrastructure Fund. That's right.
Okay. I think I just wanted to understand the structure down
No,
it's how removed you were from the Indiana part.
So we would be, the Global Infrastructure Fund is a 70% owner indirectly of the company that operates the Indiana Toll Road. So technically it's a subsidiary of the IFM Global Infrastructure Fund.
But maybe to go back to David's earlier point about managing assets intensively, IFM does share its expertise across the sectors with its underlying companies, portfolio companies effectively. So unlike some of the other players in the industry, we actually are able to second our employees to different projects or companies. And
your performance consultants as well.
And also we do have a separate team called asset management team where we'll look at the whole portfolio to see if there are efficiencies that could be brought at scale to the whole portfolio of assets. So for example, we negotiate insurance contracts for our projects at the total portfolio level.
Yeah, and just to give you an example, so we will often put people into businesses for special projects where there's a clear need. It's a good development opportunity for the person going in as well. But for example, we put people in as the head of M&A of some company. So if the company wants to do an acquisition, they don't have anyone in-house, we might put someone directly in the business. Another example, when we acquired the Indiana Toll Road, we effectively acquired that asset without a management team. So we put in people temporarily to fill roles that needed to be filled until we were able to build out the full team. So I went in and worked directly with that business for about 9 months, managing their treasury department and their financial planning department as well. So it's typically a clear need. It'll typically be for a short period of time. Or
how many boards do you sit?
I sit on one currently.
Oh, just one?
Yeah, just one.
I think it did a reference, you have like around 70 boards.
So about 70% of assets in the portfolio, IFM has some sort of control over. So it's either board seat or veto right.
Okay.
Any further questions? Sorry to drone on about the transportation portfolio, but it's very exciting to us. So we talk a little bit about performance. Do you want me to cover this?
Sure.
So just talking a little bit about performance. We are the GIF Global Infrastructure Fund targets a net return of 8 to 12% over the long term. It's currently about a $63 billion fund. As you can see over each of these periods here, we've exceeded that 8 to 12% over the long term. And we've done that with lower leverage relative to a lot of our peers. The thing about infrastructure is these are stable assets, and when they're stable assets, you can often actually get a lot of debt and leverage on them. We, as an institution, do not believe that is a great way to drive value, and it's a really great way to ruin a really good asset by putting too much leverage on one of these businesses. So we've actually been a beneficiary of that on numerous occasions where other investors have gotten into trouble by putting too much debt. We've come in, acquired the business, and put a much lower amount of debt on it. So from that perspective, we think it's a safer investment. And again, over the historical period, we've achieved a net cash yield with these returns of about 4.6% since inception. And then finally, on slide 21, you can see your own investment in the Global Infrastructure Fund. You were drawn into the assets in December of 2021. And since that time, your net time-weighted return is 9.02%, showing again that you're within that 8 to 12% band that we target.
I'll make a comment. I know some of us were on this board when we added infrastructure, and many times when managers come here, it's because things are not going well. So I've been told in my regular job, we need to celebrate successes and recognize them. So I appreciate the efforts, and I would like to pat everybody on the back and say we were right and then some on this one.
Yes.
Thank you. We appreciate your support and are happy to provide stable returns for your portfolio.
Great.
Awesome.
Were there any other discussion items at this time? Do we have any public comment?
There is none.
Okay. that concludes item 4D. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks so much.
And we will ride right into item 4E, quarterly real estate update. Robert Ravelis, Retirement Financial Investment Officer.
Trustees, you have the quarterly update, memo and reports showing some of the typical things we look at. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Although I think we talked about probably some of those during the real assets discussion. And I would actually even open it up potentially, if that's okay with the chair, for the next item, same thing, similar memo, typical memo. More than happy to answer any questions you might have. Yeah, Callan mentioned 4G too.
4G. Oh, the monthly investment performance report. Yes, we did kind of roll right over that. Does anybody have any questions or comments on items E or F? They were very similar in terms of what we were talking about, although this was focusing on quarterly, so it was the same content. We did not talk a lot about REEF.
Yeah, I think the most, you know, the biggest news out of REEF is their planned development in terms of residential projects,
Okay,
which
right,
I
right.
mentioned in the memo.
Yeah. In Tampa and a few other.
Florida,
Florida.
Phoenix, and Southern California.
Okay, do we want to get into the monthly investment report, item 4G?
Trustees, you have the monthly investment report. It shows transactions that the board has approved. We've now funded a small portion of the World ex-US Index, and we're going to continue to fund that position through the end of this month and in the first couple days of June. So performance has been good. Diversification has worked out. The international portfolio's got a almost 10% return for the year, so that's great. Last time I checked, we were at a new all-time high of 770 million. So we've reached our actuarial target for the year. Hopefully, the rest of the next few weeks, you know, is not volatile. So
Hopefully.
yeah.
Do we have any board member discussion on this item? On these three items, I should say. Do we have any public comment on these three items?
No public comment?
I'll say that considering what the outside world is got its hair on fire about it.
Yes, I agree completely. It could have been a lot worse had we put everything in, I won't say it. And that will bring us, I believe we've concluded that item. Item 4, that'll bring us to general board discussion, item 10. And I will start off with several things. First of all, you will be receiving an email today, the executive director evaluation forms. I am going to ask that everybody fill them out. We have a rapid turnaround. We need them back by June 4th. And that will go to Trustee Swope and myself. I will be, my second item, which will leverage into this, I will be out for the June, and so Trustee Swope unfortunately gets stuck doing the majority of the
Kind of works that way.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
vice chair gets stuck with it.
Yeah, right.
That happened last year.
Yeah, the time before that.
There's a trend.
Maybe we should just acknowledge that and just make it the vice chair's duty
Well, then we'll
to.
get another
Right.
vice chair.
We won't. Yeah. So as I said, I will be out, but you'll be getting that, and then we'll be also sending that to staff, and I'll talk to you about the mechanics of that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I did watch the combined, actually attended the combined HR benefits
Health,
presentation.
wellness, and retirement.
And retirement, yes, and it was an excellent presentation. I left it once again feeling that that most people, based on some of the questions I saw, still don't get the difference between a pension and a defined contribution, a defined benefit, and a defined contribution. And so the struggle goes on to help people to understand those concepts. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you also attend?
I watched, yeah, virtually, yes.
Yeah, everybody was virtual.
Yeah. So that was all I had. Are there any other discussion items? Anybody else?
On a personal matter, I think it's been referenced in a few meetings, and I've spoken with our executive director about it. I will not be seeking a third term as a safety representative. And if there's anyone watching at this stage of our very long meeting, please contact me if you're a safety member and you're interested. It could fall from the sheriff's office, probation, district attorney investigators, or SIU. So if there's anyone that's interested and you are watching, we are looking for somebody to take my spot.
SIU?
That's Special Investigations Unit, Welfare Fraud. It's been historically called.
Social services.
It is assigned to social services.
How many
but
employees are there? It used to be, I believe, about 4.
I don't know right now.
You don't know?
3 or 4 would be my guess, but I'm not 100% certain.
What is the pool number? Do you have any notion
Of those,
of all those?
so for the sheriff's office safety members, it could be corrections or field, so you're talking over 100. Probation, I have no clue, but I would ration to guess they have 60 to 80 that would be qualified to fill this position. District attorney investigators is 7, and potentially 3 to 4 from SIU. Yet we never get anyone interested, and when we do, there's usually 20 to 30 people that vote at maximum. So again, if you're watching at this stage of our long meeting, please contact me, and we can talk about the responsibilities, duties, and activities of the retirement board.
So, Richard, to sort of address your question, there's 15% of total active employees who are safety members, whether it is the welfare fraud or the DA's investigator or safety and probation. They make up about 15% of the 1,100 members.
Court security are deputy sheriffs, so they fall under the field services division that I supervise.
15% of our
1,100.
1,100 members, roughly.
I'm assuming, based on your comments, that you have not yet recruited a likely candidate.
I have actively attempted and thought they were interested, and that has changed in recent weeks. And I've spoken with the executive director about that because we were setting up a meeting for the one that I thought was interested, but they may still be, but I'm throwing a wide net right now.
Well, if there's anything I can do, I will gladly help.
Absolutely.
You recruited me.
And just so everyone
it's
understands,
effective.
we can have a primary safety rep and an alternate safety rep, which we have never had in numerous decades.
That's correct. I don't believe it's ever occurred.
It would be great succession planning if we could.
It would be that they wouldn't be from the same safety group. So if one was from the sheriff's office, the other could be from probation or one of those other safety groups. But we do have the capacity to have both a safety member and an alternate safety member.
And I appreciate what you said, Alex. I talked over you, but I know that you can talk about the process of being a newer member. And as a general member of this, I think it's the better they understand what they may be committing to, the better off we are.
Employee emails.
We can, yeah.
With information.
I can certainly draft that with the executive director of at least an email on my side. We have email groups for the sheriff's office that I could send out if they're interested. They can contact me. But
sure.
Okay. Do we have any other items for discussion? All right. That brings us to item 11, adjournment and notice of next Board of Retirement meeting.
I did have.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll go circle back to Tim.
On the Sackers, on AB 409, extending sunset on existing laws governing teleconferencing. The stacker, you know if they've been pushing this at all?
I don't think so.
Thank you. I move adjourned.
Okay. The next Board of Retirement meeting will be held in the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association Boardroom, 625B Kings Court, Ukiah, California, on Wednesday, June 18th at 8:30 a.m. The meeting is adjourned at 12:09.
Quincy, I'll be sorry.